Chapter 21. It was nearly 6 o'clock, but only gray, imperfect, misty dawn when we drew nigh the wharf. There are some sailors running ahead there. If I see right, said I to Queequeg, it can't be shadows. She's off by sunrise, I guess. Come on, Abast, cried a voice whose owner, at the same time, coming close behind us, laid a hand upon both our shoulders, and then, insinuating himself between us, stood stooping forward a little in the uncertain twilight, strangely peering from Queequeg to me. It was Elijah. Going aboard? Hands off, will you, said I. Look here, said Queequeg, shaking himself. Go away. Aren't going aboard, then? Yes, we are, said I. But what business is that of yours? Do you know, Mr. Elijah, that I consider you a little impertinent? No. I wasn't aware of that, said Elijah, slowly and wonderingly looking from me to Queequeg, with the most unaccountable glances. Elijah, said I, you will oblige my friend and me by withdrawing. We are going to the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and would prefer not to be detained. Yeah, there, yeah. Coming back afore breakfast? He's cracked. Queequeg, said I. Come on. Holloa, cried stationary Elijah, hailing us when we had removed a few paces. Never mind him, said I. Queequeg, come on. But he stole up to us again, and suddenly, clapping his hand on my shoulder, said, Did you see anything looking like men going towards that ship a while ago? Struck by this plain matter-of-fact question, I answered, saying, Yes, I thought I did see 4 or 5 men, but it was too dim to be sure. Very dim, said Elijah. Warning to ye. Once more we quitted him, but once more he came softly after us, and touching my shoulder again, said, See if you can find them now, will ye? Find who? Morning to ye. Morning to you, he rejoined.
Again moving off.
Oh, it's like I was going to warn ye against. But never mind. It's all one. All in the family too. Sharp frost this morning, aren't it? Goodbye to ye. Shan't see you again very soon, I guess. Unless it's before the grand jury. And with these cracked words, he finally departed, leaving me, for the moment, in no small wonderment at his frantic impudence. At last, stepping on board the Pequod, we found everything in profound quiet, not a soul moving. The cabin entrance was locked within. The hatches were all on and lumbered with coils of rigging. Going forward to the forecastle, he found the slide of the scuttle open. Seeing a light, we went down and found only an old, wrapped in a tattered Pequod. He was thrown at whole length upon 2 chests, his face downwards, and enclosed in his folded arms. The profoundest slumber slept upon him. Those sailors we saw, Queequeg, where can they have gone to? Said I, looking dubiously at the sleeper. But it seemed that, when on the wharf, Queequeg had not at all noticed what I now alluded to. Hence, I would have thought myself to have been optically deceived in that matter, were it not for Elijah's otherwise inexplicable question. But I beat the thing down, and again marking the sleeper, jocularly hinted to Queequeg that perhaps we had best sit up with the body. Telling him to establish himself accordingly, he put his hand upon the sleeper's rear, as though feeling if it was soft enough, and then, without more ado, sat quietly down there. Gracious. Oh, Perry dude seat, said Queequeg. My country way. One hurt him face, said I called out his face. Very benevolent countenance then. But how hard he breathes. He's heating himself. Get off, Queequeg, you are heavy. It's grinding the face of the poor. Get off, Queequeg. Look, he'll twitch you off soon. I wonder he don't wake. Queequeg removed himself to just beyond the head of the sleeper and lighted his tomahawk pipe. I sat at the feet. We kept the pipe passing over the sleeper, from one to the other. Meanwhile, upon questioning him in his broken fashion, Queequeg gave me to understand that in his land, owing to the absence of settees and sofas of all sorts, the king, chiefs, and great people generally were in the custom of fattening some of the lower orders for ottomans. And to furnish a house comfortably in that respect, you would only to buy up 8 or 10 lazy fellows and lay them round in the piers and alcoves. Besides, it was very convenient on an excursion, much better than those garden chairs which are convertible into walking sticks. Upon occasion, a chief calling his attendant and desiring him to make a settee of himself under a spreading tree, perhaps in some damp, marshy place. While narrating these things, every time Queequeg received the tomahawk from me, he flourished the hatchet side of it over the sleeper's head. What's that for, Queequeg? Very easy. Killing.
Oh,
Very easy. He was going on with some wild reminiscences about his tomahawk pipe, which, it seemed, had in its 2 uses both brained his foes and soothed his soul, when we were directly attracted to the sleeping rigger. The strong vapor, now completely filling the contracting hole, it began to tell upon him. He breathed with a sort of muffledness, then seemed troubled in the nose, then revolved over once or twice, and then sat up and rubbed his eyes. Halloa! He breathed at last, "Who be ye smokers?" "Shit, men," answered I. "When does she sail?" "Aye, aye. You're going in her be—" "She sails today. The captain came aboard last night." "What captain?" "Ahab. Who but him, indeed? I was going to ask him some further questions concerning Ahab, and we heard a noise on deck." "Halloa! Starbuck's a steer," said the rigger. "He's a lively chief mate, that he says, good man, and a pious. But all alive now, I must turn to." And so, saying, he went on deck, and we followed. It was now clear sunrise. Soon the crew came on board in 2s and 3s. The riggers bestirred themselves. The mates were actively engaged, and several of the shore people were busy in bringing various last things on board. Meanwhile, Captain Ahab remained invisibly enshrined within his cabin. Chapter 22. At length, towards noon, upon the final dismissal of the ship's riggers, and after the Pequod had been hauled out from the wharf, and after the ever-thoughtful Charity had come off in a whaleboat, with her last gift, a nightcap for Stubb, the second mate, her brother-in-law, and a spare Bible for the steward. After all this, the 2 captains, Peleg and Bildad, issued from the cabin, and turning to the chief mate, Peleg said, "Now, Mr. Starbuck, are you sure everything is right?" "Captain Ahab is all ready. Just spoke to him. Nothing more to be got from—" "Sure. Eh? Well, call all hands then. Muster them aft here. Blast them. No need of profane words, however great the hurry." "Peleg," said Bildad, "but away with thee, friend Starbuck, and do our bidding." "How now?" Here upon the very point of starting for the voyage, Captain Peleg and Captain Bildad were going it with a high hand on the quarter deck, just as if they were to be joint commanders at sea, as well as to all appearances in port. And as for Captain Ahab, no sign of him was yet to be seen. Only they said he was in the cabin. But then the idea was that his presence was by no means necessary in getting the ship under way, and steering her well out to sea. Indeed, as that was not at all his proper business, but the pilot's. And as he was not yet completely recovered, so they said, therefore, Captain Ahab stayed below. And all this seemed natural enough, especially as in the merchant service, many captains never showed themselves on deck for a considerable time after heaving up the anchor, but remain over the cabin table, having a farewell merrymaking with their shore friends before they quit the ship for good with the pilot. But there was not much chance to think over the matter, for Captain Peleg was now all alive. He seemed to do most of the talking and commanding, and not Bildad. Aft here, ye sons of bachelors, he cried, as the sailors lingered at the mainmast. Mr. Starbuck, drive them aft. Strike the tent there, was the next order. As I hinted before, this whalebone marquee was never pitched except in port, and on board the Pequod for 30 years, the order to strike the tent was well known to be the next thing to heaving up the anchor. Man, the capstan. Blood and fire. Jump was the next command, and the crew sprang for the handspikes. Now, in getting underway, the station generally occupied by the pilot is the forward part of the ship. And here, Bildad, who, with Peleg, be it known, in addition to his other officers, was one of the licensed pilots of the port. He being suspected to have got himself made a pilot in order to save the Nantucket pilot fee to all the ships he was concerned in. For he never piloted any other craft, Bildad, I say, might now be seen actively engaged in looking over the bows for the approaching anchor, and at intervals singing what seemed the dismal stave of psalmody to cheer the hands at the windlass, who roared forth some sort of a chorus about the girls in Boobalally with hearty good will. Nevertheless, not 3 days previous, Bildad had told them that no profane songs would be allowed on board the Pequod, particularly in getting underway, and Charity, his sister, had placed a small choice copy of Watts in each seaman's berth. Meantime, overseeing the other part of the ship, Captain Peleg ripped and swore astern in the most frightful manner. I almost thought he would sink the ship before the anchor could be got up. Involuntarily, I paused on my handspike and told Queequeg to do the same, thinking of the perils we both ran in starting on the voyage with such a devil for a pilot. I was comforting myself, however, with the thought that in pious Bildad might be found some salvation, spite of his 777th lay, when I felt a sudden sharp poke in my rear, and turning round, was horrified at the apparition of Captain Peleg, in the act of withdrawing his leg from my immediate vicinity. That was my first kick. Is that the way they heave in the Marchand service? He roared, "Spring, thou sheephead, spring and break thy backbone." Why don't you spring? I say, all of ye spring. Quillhog, spring thou chap with the red whiskers. Spring there, Scotch cap. Spring, thou green pants. Spring, I say, all of ye.
And spring your eyes out.
And so, saying, he moved along the windlass, here and there, using his leg very freely, while imperturbable Bildad kept leading off with his psalmody. Thinks I, Captain Peleg must have been drinking something today. At last, the anchor was up, the sails were set, and off we glided. It was a short, cold Christmas, and as the short northern day merged into night, we found ourselves almost broad upon the wintry ocean, whose freezing spray cased us in ice as in polished iron. The long rows of teeth on the bulwarks glistened in the moonlight. and like the white ivory tusks of some huge elephant, vast curving icicles depended from the bows. Link Bildad, as pilot, headed the first watch, and ever and anon, as the old craft deep dived into the green seas and sent the shivering frost all over her. When the winds howled and the cordage rang, his steady notes were heard. Sweet fields beyond the swelling flood stand dressed in living green. So to the Jews, old Canaan stood, while Jordan rolled between. Never did those sweet words sound more sweetly to me than then. They were full of hope and fruition, spite of this frigid winter night in the boisterous Atlantic, spite of my wet feet and wetter jacket. There was yet, it then seemed to me, many a pleasant haven and meads and glades so eternally vernal that the grass shut up by the spring, untrodden, unwilted, remains at midsummer. At last we deigned such an awe thing that the two pilots were no longer. The stout sailboat that had accompanied us began ranging alongside. It was curious and not unpleasing how Peleg and Bildad were affected at this juncture, especially Captain Bildad, for loath to depart, yet very loath to for good, a ship bound on so long and perilous a voyage beyond both stormy capes. A ship in which some thousands of his hard-earned dollars were invested. A ship in which an old shipmate sailed, a man almost as old as he, once more starting to encounter all the terrors of the pitiless job, but loath to say goodbye to a thing so every way brimful of every interest to him. Poor old Bildad lingered long, paced the deck with anxious strides, ran down into the cabin to speak another farewell word there. I then came on deck and looked to windward, looked towards the wide and endless waters, only bounded by the far-off, unseen eastern continents. Looked towards the land, looked aloft, looked right and left, looked everywhere and nowhere, and at last, mechanically coiling a rope upon its pin, convulsively grasped stout Peleg by the hand and holding up a lantern. For a moment stood gazing heroically in his face, as much as to say, nevertheless, "Friend Peleg, I can stand it." Yes, I can. As for Peleg himself, he took it more like a philosopher. But for all his philosophy, there was a tear twinkling in his eye and he too did not a little run from cabin to deck, now a word below and now a word with Starbuck, the chief mate. But at last he turned to his comrade with a final sort of look about him. "Captain Bildad, come old shipmate, we must go. Back the mean yarn there. Boat ahoy. Stand by to come close alongside. Now, careful. Come though, bad boy. Say your last. Luck to ye. Starbuck. Luck to ye. Mr. Stubb. Luck to ye. Mr. Flask, goodbye, and good luck to ye all. And this day, 3 years, I'll have a hot supper smoky for ye in old Nantucket. Hurrah, and away. God bless ye, and have ye in his holy keeping. Men, murmured old Bildad, almost incoherently. I hope you'll have fine weather now, so that Captain Ahab may soon be moving among you. A pleasant sun is all he, and you'll have plenty of them in the tropic voyage ye go. Be careful in the hunt, ye mates. Don't stave the boats needlessly, ye harpooneers. Good white cedar plank is raised full 3% within. Don't forget your prayers either. Mr. Starbuck, mind that Cooper don't waste the spare stays. Oh, the sail needles are in the green locker. Don't whale it too much on Lord's days, men. But don't miss a fair chance either. That's rejecting heaven's good gifts. Have an eye to the molasses tierce, Mr. Stubb. It was a little leaky, I thought. If you touch at the islands, Mr. Flask, beware of fornication. Goodbye. Goodbye. Don't keep that cheese too long down in the hold, Mr. Starbuck. It'll spoil. Be careful with the butter. 20 cents the pound it was, and mind ye, if. Come, come, Captain Gildad. Stop palavering. Away. And with that, Peleg hurried him over the side, and both drop into the boat. Ship and boat diverged. The cold, damp night breeze blew between. A screaming gull flew overhead. The 2 hulls wildly rolled. We gave 3 heavy-hearted cheers, and blindly plunged like fate into the lone Atlantic. Chapter 23. Some chapters back, one Bulkington was spoken of, a tall, new-landed mariner, encountered in New Bedford at the inn. When on that shivering winter's night, the Pequod thrust her vindictive bows into the cold, malicious waves, who should I see standing at her helm but Bulkington? I looked with sympathetic awe and fearfulness upon the man, who in midwinter, just landed from a 4 years' dangerous voyage, could so unrestingly push off again for still another tempestuous tone. The land seemed scorching to his feet. Wonderfulest things are ever the unmentionable. Deep memories yield no epitaphs. This 6-inch chapter is the stoneless grave of Bulkington. Let me only say that it fared with him as with the storm-tossed ship that miserably drives along the leeward land. The port would fain give succor. The port is pitiful. And the port is safety, comfort, hearthstone, supper, warm blankets, friends, all that's kind to our mortalities. But in that gale, the port, the land, is that ship's direst jeopardy. She must fly all hospitality. One touch of land, though it grazed the keel, would make her shudder through and through. With all her might, she crowds all sail offshore. In so doing, fights against the very winds that fain would blow her homeward. Seeks all the lashed sea's landlessness again, for refuge's sake forlornly rushing into peril. Her only friend, her bitterest foe. Know ye now, Bulkington? Glimpses do you seem to see of that mortally intolerable truth, that all deep, earnest thinking is but the intrepid effort of the soul to keep the open independence of her sea, while the wildest winds of heaven and earth conspire to cast her on the treacherous, slavish shore. But as in landlessness alone resides highest truth, sureless, indefinite as God, so better is it to perish in that howling infinite than be ingloriously dashed upon the leap, even if that were safety. For worm-like then, oh, who would craven crawl to land? Terrors of the terrible, is all this agony so vain? Take heart, O Bulkington. Bear thee grimly, demigod, up from the spray of thy ocean, perishing straight up, leaps thy apotheosis. Chapter 24. As Queequeg and I are now fairly embarked in this business of whaling, and as this business of whaling has somehow come to be regarded among landsmen as a rather unpoetical and disreputable pursuit, therefore I am all anxiety to convince ye landsmen, of the injustice hereby done to us hunters of whales. In the first place, it may be deemed almost superfluous to establish the fact that among people at large, the business of whaling is not accounted on a level with what are called the liberal professions. If a stranger were introduced into any miscellaneous metropolitan society, it would be slightly advance the general opinion of his merits, were he presented to the company as a harpooner, say. And if, in emulation of the naval offices, he should append the initials SWF, sperm whale fishery, to his visiting card, such a procedure would be deemed preeminently presuming and ridiculous. Doubtless one leading reason why the world declines honoring us whale is this. They think that at best our vocation amounts to a butchering sort of business, and that when actively engaged therein, we are surrounded by all manner of defilements. Butchers we are. That is true. But butchers also, and butchers of the bloodiest badge, have been all martial commanders, whom the world invariably delights to honor. And then, for the matter of the alleged uncleanliness of our business, you shall soon be initiated into certain facts hitherto pretty generally unknown, in which, upon the whole, will triumphantly plant the sperm whale ship. But even granting the charge in question to be true, what disordered slippery decks of a whale ship are comparable to the unspeakable carrion of those battlefields from which so many soldiers return to drink in all ladies' plaudits? And if the idea of peril so much enhances the popular conceit of the soldier's profession, let me assure you that many a veteran who has freely marched up to a battle would quickly recoil at the apparition of the sperm whale's vast tail, fanning into eddies the air over his head. For what are the comprehensible terrors of man compared with the interlinked terrors and wonders of God? But though the world scouts at us, whale hunters, yet does it unwittingly pay us the profoundest homage. Yeah, an all-abounding adoration are almost all the tapers, lamps, and candles that burn round the globe, burn as before, so many shrines to our glory. But look at this matter in other lights, weigh it in all sorts of scales, see what we whalemen are and have been. Why did the Dutch in De Witt's time have admirals in their whaling fleets? Why did Louis XVI of France, at his own personal expense, fit out whaling ships from Dunkirk and politely invite to that town some score or two of families from our own island in Nantucket? Why did Britain, between the years 1750 and 1788, pay to her whalemen in bounties upwards of £1,000,000? And lastly, how comes it that we whalemen of America now outnumber all the rest of the banded whalemen in the world? Sail, a maybe, of upwards of 700 vessels, manned by 18,000 men, yearly consuming $4 million. The ship's worth, at the time of sailing, $20 million. And every year importing into our harbors a well-reaped harvest of $7 million. How comes all this, if there be not something puissant in whaling? But this is not the half. Look again. I freely assert that the cosmopolite philosopher cannot, for his life, point out one single peaceful ignorance, which within the last 60 years has operated more potentially upon the whole broad world, taken in one aggregate, and the high and mighty business of whaling. One way and another, it has begotten events so remarkable in themselves, and so continuously momentous in their sequential issues, that whaling may well be regarded as that Egyptian mother who bore offspring themselves pregnant from her womb. It would be a hopeless, endless task to catalog all these things, that a handful suffice. For many years past, the whale ship has been the pioneer in ferreting out the remotest and least known parts of the earth. She has explored seas and archipelagos which had no chart, where no Cook or Vancouver had ever sailed. If American and European men of war now peacefully ride in once savage harbors, let them fire salutes to the honor and glory of the whale ship, which originally showed them the way, and first interpreted between them and the savages. They may celebrate, as they will, the heroes of exploring expeditions, your Cooks, your crews and sterns. But I say that scores of anonymous captains have sailed out of Nantucket that were as great and greater than your Cook at your Kirstenstern. For in their succorless empty-handedness, they, in the heathenish, sharked waters, and by the beaches of unrecorded javelin islands, battled with gin wonder and terror that Cook with all his marine would not willingly have dared. All that has made such a flourish of in the old South Sea voyages, those things were but the lifetime commonplaces of our heroic Nantucketus. Often adventures, which Vancouver dedicates 3 chapters to, these men accounted unworthy of being set down in ship's common log. The world. Oh, the world. Until the whale fishery rounded Cape Horn, no commerce, but colonial, scarcely any intercourse, but colonial, was carried on between Europe and the long line of the opulent Spanish provinces on the Pacific coast. It was the whaleman who first broke through the jealous policy of the Spanish crown touching those colonies. And if space permitted, it might be distinctly shown how from those whalemen at last eventuated the liberation of Peru, Chile, and Bolivia from the yoke of old Spain, and the establishment of the eternal democracy in those parts. That great America on the other side of the sphere, Australia, was given to the enlightened world by the whalemen. After its first blunder-born discovery by a Dutchman, all other ships long shunned those shores as pestiferously barbarous. But the whale ship touched there. The whale ship is the true mother of that now mighty colony. Moreover, in the infancy of the first Australian settlement, the emigrants were several times saved from starvation by the benevolent biscuit of the whale ship, luckily dropping an anchor in their waters. The uncounted isles of all Polynesia confess the same truth and do commercial homage to the whale ship that cleared the way for the missionary and the merchant, and in many cases carried the primitive missionaries to their first destinations. If that double-bolted land, Japan, is ever to become hospitable, it is the whale ship alone to whom the credit will be due, for already she is on the threshold. But if, in the face of all this, you still declare that whaling has no aesthetically noble associations connected with it, then am I ready to shiver 50 lances with you there, and unhorse you with a split helmet every time. The whale has no famous author, in whaling no famous conifer, you will say. The whale no famous author, and whaling no famous chronicler, who wrote the first account of our Leviathan. Who, but mighty Job? And who composed the first narrative of a whaling voyage? Who, but no less a prince than Alfred the Great? Who, with his own royal pen, took down the words from other, the Norwegian whale hunter of those times, and who pronounced our glowing eulogy in Parliament? Who, but Edmund Burke? True enough, but then whalemen themselves are poor devils. They have no good blood in their veins. No good blood in the veins? They have something better than royal blood there. The grandmother of Benjamin Franklin was Mary Norrell. Afterwards, by marriage, Mary Folger, one of the old settlers of Nantucket, and the ancestress to a long line of Folgers and Harpoonians, all kith and kin to noble Benjamin, this day darting the barbed iron from one side of the world to the other. Good again, but then all confess that somehow whaling is not respectable. Whaling not respectable. Whaling is imperial. Whaling is imperial. Whaling, by Old English statutory law, the whale is declared a royal fish. Oh, that's only nominal. The whale himself has never figured in any grand imposing way. The whale never figured in any grand imposing way in one of the mighty triumphs given to a Roman general upon his entering the world's capital. The bones of a whale, brought all the way from the Syrian most conspicuous object to symboled procession. Granted, since you cite it. But say what you will, there is no real dignity in whaling. No dignity in whaling? The dignity of our calling the very heavens attest. Cetus is a constellation in the south. No more. Drive down your hat in presence of the Tsar and take it off to Pequod. No more. I know a man that in his lifetime has taken 350 whales. I account that man more honorable than that great captain of antiquity who boasted of taking as many walled towns. And as for me, if by any possibility there be any as yet undiscovered prime thing, if I shall ever deserve any real repute in that small but high-hushed world, which I might not be unreasonably ambitious of, if hereafter I shall do anything that, upon the whole, a man might rather have done than to have left undone, if, at my death, my executors, or more properly my creditors, find any precious MSS in my desk, then here I prospectively ascribe all the honor and the glory to whaling. For a whale ship was my Yale College and my Harvard. Chapter 25. In behalf of the dignity of whaling, I would fain advance not but substantiated facts. But after embattling his facts, an advocate who should wholly suppress a not unreasonable surmise, which might tell eloquently upon his cause. Such an advocate, would he not be blameworthy? It is well known, but at the coronation of kings and queens, even modern ones, a certain curious process of seasoning them for their functions is gone through. There is a salt cellar of state, so-called, and there may be a caster of state. How they use the salt, precisely, who knows? Certain I am, however, that a king's head is solemnly oiled at his coronation, even as a head of salad. Can it be, though, that they anoint it with a view of making its interior run well, as they anoint machinery? Much might be ruminated here concerning the essential dignity of this regal process, because in common life we esteem but mean and contemptibly a fellow who anoints his hair, and palpably smells of that anointing. In truth, a mature man who uses hair oil, unless medicinally, that man has probably got a quaggy spot in him somewhere. As a general rule, he can't amount to much in his totality. But the only thing to be considered here is this: what kind of oil is used at coronations? Certainly it cannot be olive oil, nor macassar oil, nor castor oil, nor bear's oil, nor train oil, nor cod liver oil. What then can it possibly be but sperm oil in its unmanufactured, unpolluted state, the sweetest of all oils? Think of that, ye loyal Britons. We whalemen supply your kings and queens with coronation stuff. Chapter 26. The chief mate of the Pequod was Starbuck, a native of Nantucket and a Quaker by descent. He was a long, earnest man, and though born on an icy coast, seemed well adapted to endure hot latitudes, his flesh being hard as twice-baked biscuit. Transported to the Indies, his live blood would not spoil like bottled ale. He must have been born in some time of general drought and famine, or upon one of those fast days for which his state is famous. Only some 30 arid summers had he seen. Those summers had dried up all his physical superfluousness. But this, his thinness, so to speak, seemed no more the token of wasting anxieties and cares than it seemed the indication of any bodily blight. It was merely the condensation of the man. He was by no means ill-looking. Quite the contrary. His pure tight skin was an excellent fit, and closely wrapped up in it and embalmed with inner health and strength, like a revivified Egyptian. The Starbuck seemed prepared to endure for long ages to come, to endure always as now. Howbeit, polar snow, or torrid sun, like a patent chronometer, his interior vitality was warranted to do well in all climates. Looking into his eyes, you seem to see there the yet lingering images of those thousand-fold perils he had calmly confronted through life. A staid, steadfast man whose life, for the most part, was a telling pantomime of action, and not a tame chapter of sounds. Yet, for all his hearty sobriety and fortitude, there were certain qualities in him which at times affected, and in some cases seemed well nigh to overbalance all the rest. Uncommonly conscientious for a seaman, and endued with a deep natural reverence, the wild watery loneliness of his life did therefore strongly incline him to superstition. But to that sort of superstition, which in some organizations seems rather to spring somehow from intelligence than from ignorance. Outward portents and inward presentiments were his. And if at times these things bent the welded iron of his soul, much more did his faraway domestic memories of his young Cape life and child tend to bend him still more from the original ruggedness of his nature, and open him still further to those latent influences which, in some honest-hearted men, restrain the gush of daredevil daring, so often evinced by others in the more perilous vicissitudes of the fishery. "I will have no man in my boat," said Starbuck, "who is not afraid of a whale." By this, he seemed to mean not only that the most reliable and useful courage was that which arises from the fair estimation of the encountered peril, but that an utterly fearless man is a far more dangerous comrade than a coward. I, said Stubb, the second mate, Starbuck, there, is as careful a man as you'll find anywhere in this fishery. But we shall ere long see what that word careful precisely means when used by a man like Stubb or almost any other whale hunter. Starbuck was no crusader after perils. In him, courage was not a sentiment, but a thing simply useful to him, and always at hand upon all mortally practical occasions. Besides, he thought, perhaps, that in this business of whaling, courage was one of the great staple outfits of the ship, like her beef and her bread, and not to be foolishly wasted. Wherefore he had no fancy for lowering for whales after sundown, nor for persisting in fighting a fish that too much persisted in sighting him. For thought Starbuck, I am here in this critical ocean to kill whales for my living, and not to be killed by them for theirs. And that hundreds of men had been so killed, Starbuck well knew. What doom was his own father's? Where in the bottomless deeps could he find the torn limbs of his brother? With memories like these in him, and moreover, given to a certain superstitiousness, as has been said, the courage of this Starbuck, which could, nevertheless, still flourish, must indeed have been extreme. But it was not in reasonable nature that a man so organized, and with such terrible experiences and remembrances as he, it was not in nature that these things should fail in latently engendering an element in him, which, under suitable circumstances, would break out from its confinement and burn all his courage up. And brave as he might be, there was that sort of bravery chiefly visible in some intrepid men, which, while generally abiding firm in the conflict with seas, or winds, or whales, or any of the ordinary irrational horrors of the world, yet cannot withstand those more terrific because more spiritual terrors, which sometimes menace you from the concentrating brow of an enraged and mighty man. But were the coming narrative to reveal, in any instance, the complete abasement of poor Starbuck's fortitude, scarce might I have the heart to write it. For it is a thing most sorrowful, nay shocking, to expose the fall of valor in the soul. Men may seem detestable as joint stock companies and nations. Knaves, fools, and murderers there may be. Men may have mean and meager faces, but man, in the ideal, is so noble and so sparkling, such a grand and glowing creature, that over any ignominious blemish in him, all his fellows should run to throw their costliest robes. That immaculate manliness we feel within ourselves, so far within us that it remains intact, though all the outer characters seem gone. Bleeds with keenest anguish at the undraped spectacle of a valor-ruined man. Nor can piety itself, at such a shameful sight, completely stifle her upbraidings against the permitting stars. But this august dignity I treat of is not the dignity of kings in robes, but that abounding dignity, which has no robed investiture. Thou shalt see it shining in the arm that wields a pick or drives a spike, that democratic dignity which on all hands radiates without end from God Himself, the great God, absolute, the center and circumference of all democracy. His omnipresence, our divine equality. If then, to meanest mariners and renegades and castaways, I shall hereafter ascribe high qualities, though dark, weave round them tragic graces, if even the most scornful, perchance the most abased, among them all, shall at times lift himself to the exalted mounts. If I shall touch that workman's arm with some ethereal light, if I shall spread a rainbow over his disastrous set of sun, then against all mortal critics bear me out in it, thou just spirit of equality, which has spread one royal mantle of humanity over all my kind. Bear me out in it, thou great democratic God, who didst not refuse to the swart convict Bunyan the pale poetic pearl, thou who didst clothe with doubly hammered leaves of finest gold the stumped and paupered arm of old Cervantes, thou who didst pick up Andrew Jackson from the pebbles, who didst hurl him upon a war horse, who didst thunder him higher than a throne, thou who, in all thy mighty, earthly marchings, ever callest thy selectest champion from the kingly commons, bear me out in it, O God. Chapter 27. Stubb was the second mate. He was a native of Cape Cod, and hence, according to local usage, was called a Cape Cod man, a happy-go-lucky, neither craven nor valiant, taking perils as they came with an indifferent air, and while engaged in the most imminent crisis of the chase, toiling away, calm and collected as a journeyman joiner engaged for the year. Good-humored, easy, and careless, he presided over his whaleboat, as if the most deadly encounter were but a dinner, and his crew all invited guests. He was as particular about the comfortable arrangement of his part of the boat as an old stage driver is about the snugness of his box. When close to the whale, in the very deathlock of the fight, he handled his unpitying lance coolly and offhandedly as a whistling tinker his hammer. He would hum over his old rigadig tunes while flank with the most exasperated monster. Long usage had, for this stuff, converted the jaws of death the easy chair. What he fed of death itself, there is no telling. Whether he ever thought of it at all might be a question. But if he ever did chance to cast his mind that way after a comfortable, no doubt like a good sailor, he took it to be a sort of call of the watch to tumble aloft, and bestir themselves there about something which he would find out when he obeyed the order, and not sooner. What, perhaps with other things, made Stubb such an easygoing, unfearing, so cheerily trudging off with the burden of life, a world full of grave pedlars, all bowed to the ground with their packs? What helped to bring about that almost impious good humor of his? That thing must have been his pipe. For like his nose, his shirt-black little pipe was one of the regular features of his face. You would almost as soon have expected him to turn out of his bunk without his nose as without his pipe. He kept a whole row of pipes there, ready loaded, stuck in a rack, within easy reach of his hand. And whenever he turned in, He smoked them all out in succession, writing one from the other to the end of the chapter, then loading them again to be in readiness anew. For, when Stubb dressed, instead of first putting his legs into his trousers, he put his pipe into his mouth. I say this continual smoking must have been one cause, at least, of his peculiar disposition. For everyone knows that this earthly air, whether ashore or afloat, is terribly infected with the nameless miseries of the numberless mortals who have died exhaling. And, as in time of the cholera, some people go about with a camphorated handkerchief to their mouths. So, likewise, against all mortal tribulations, Stubb's tobacco smoke might have operated as a sort of disinfecting agent. The third mate was Flask, a native of Tisbury in Martha's Vineyard, a short, stout, ruddy young fellow, very pugnacious concerning whales, who somehow seemed to think that the great Leviathans had personally and hereditarily affronted him, and therefore it was a sort of point of honor with him to destroy them whenever encountered. So utterly lost was he to all sense of reverence for the many marvels of their majestic bulk and mystic ways, and so dead to anything, like an apprehension of any possible danger from encountering them, that, in his poor opinion, the wondrous whale was but a species of magnified mouse, or at least water rat, requiring only a little circumvention and some small application of time and trouble in order to kill and boil. This ignorant, unconscious fearlessness of his made him a little waggish in the matter of whales. He followed these fish for the fun of it, and a 3 years' voyage round Cape Horn was only a jolly joke that lasted that length of time. As a carpenter's nails are divided into wrought nails and cut nails, so mankind may be similarly divided. Little Flask was one of the wrought ones, made to clinch tight and last long. They called him King Post on board of the Pequod, because, in form, he could be well likened to the short square timber known by that name in Arctic whalers, and which by the means of many radiating side timbers inserted into it serves to brace the ship against the icy concussions of those battering seas. Now these three mates, Starbuck, Stubb, and Flask, were momentous men. They it was who by universal prescription commanded 3 of the Pequod's boats as headsmen. And that grand order of battle, in which Captain Ahab would probably marshal his forces to descend on the whales, these 3 headsmen were as captains of companies, or, being armed with their long, keen whaling spears, they were as a picked trio of lancers, even as the harpooneers were flingers of javelins. And since in this famous fishery, each mate or headsman, like a Gothic knight of old, is always accompanied by his boat steerer or harpooneer, who in certain conjunctures provides him with a fresh lance, when the former one has been badly twisted or elbowed in the assault. And moreover, as there generally subsists between the two a close intimacy and friendliness, it is therefore but meet that in this place we set down who the Pequod's harpooneers were, and to what headsman each of them belonged. First of all was Queequeg, whom Starbuck, the chief mate, had selected for his squire. But Queequeg is already known. Next was Tashtego, an unmixed Indian from Gayhead, the most westerly promontory of Martha's Vineyard, where there still exists the last remnant of a village of red men, which has long supplied the neighboring island of Nantucket with many of her most daring harpoons. In the fishery, they usually go by the generic name of Gayheaders. Tashtego's long, lean, sable hair, his high cheekbones, and black rounding eyes, for an Indian, Oriental in their largeness, but Antarctic in their glittering expression. All this sufficiently proclaimed him an inheritor of the unvitiated blood of those proud warrior hunters who, in quest of the great New England moose, had scoured, bow in hand, the aboriginal forests of the Maine. But no longer snuffing in the trail of the wild beasts of the woodland, Tashtego now hunted, in the wake of the great whales of the sea, the unerring harpoon of the sun, fitly replacing the infallible arrow of the sires. To look at the tawny brawn of his lithe, snaky limbs, you would almost have credited the superstitions of some of the earlier Puritans, and half believed this wild Indian to be a son of the Prince of the Powers of the Air. Tashtego was Stubb, the second mate squire. Third among the harpooneers was Daggoo, a gigantic, coal-black Negro savage with a lion-like tread and a Hoswaris to behold. Suspended from his ears were two golden hoops, so large that the sailors called them ring bolts, and would talk of securing the top sail halyards to them. In his youth, Daggoo had voluntarily shipped on board of a whaler, lying in a lonely bay on his native coast, and never having been anywhere in the world but in Africa, Nantucket, and the pagan harbors most frequented by whalemen, and having now led for many years the bold life of the fishery in the ships of owners, uncommonly heedful of what manner of men they shipped, Daggoo retained all his barbaric virtues, and erect as a giraffe, moved about the decks in all the pomp of 6'5" in his socks. There was a corporeal humility in looking up at him, and a white man standing before him seemed a white flag come to bed truce of a fortress. Curious to tell, this imperial Negro, Ahasuerus Daggoo, was the squire of Little Flask, who looked like a chess man beside him. As for the residue of the Pequod's company, be it said that at the present day not 1 in 2 of the many thousand men before the mast employed in the American whale fishery are Americans born, though pretty nearly all the officers are. Herein it is the same with the American whale fishery, as with the American army and military and merchant navies, and the engineering forces employed in the construction of the American canals and railroads. The same, I say, because in all these cases, the Native American liberally provides the brains, the rest of the world, as generously supplying the muscles. No small number of these whaling seamen belong to the Azores, where the outward-bound Nantucket whalers frequently touch to augment their crews from the hardy peasants of those rocky shores. In like manner, the Greenland whalers sailing out of Hull or London put in at the Shetland Islands to receive the full complement of their crew. Upon the passage homewards, they dropped them there again. How it is, there's no telling, but islanders seem to make the best whalemen. They were nearly all islanders in the Pequod, isolators too. I call such, not acknowledging the common continent as men, but each isolato living on a separate continent of his own. Yet now, federated along one keel, what a set these isolatos were! An Anacharsis Klutz deputation from all the isles of the sea, and all the ends of the earth, accompanying old Ahab and the Pequod, to lay the world's grievances before that bar, from which not very many of them ever come back. Black little Pip, he never did. Oh no. He went before. Poor Alabama boy. On the grim Pequod's forecastle, you shall ere long see him, beating his tambourine. Prelus Eve of the eternal time, when sent forth to the great quarterdeck on high, he was bid strike in with angels, and beat his tambourine in glory. Called a coward here, hailed a hero there. Chapter 28. For several days after leaving Nantucket, nothing above hatches was seen of Captain Ahab. The mates regularly relieved each other at the watches, and for aught that could be seen to the contrary, they seemed to be the only commanders of the ship. Only they sometimes issued from the cabin with orders so sudden and peremptory that after all, it was plain they but commanded vicariously. Yes, their supreme lord and dictator was there, though hitherto unseen by any eyes not permitted to penetrate into the now sacred retreat of the cabin. Every time I ascended to the deck from my watches below, I instantly gazed aft to mark if any strange face were visible, for my first vague disquietude touching the unknown captain, now in the seclusion of the sea, became almost a perturbation. This was strangely heightened at times by the ragged Elijah's diabolical incoherences uninvitedly recurring to me, with a subtle energy I could not have before conceived of. But poorly could I withstand them, much as in other moods. I was almost ready to smile at the solemn whimsicalities of that outlandish prophet of the wars. But whatever it was of apprehensiveness or uneasiness, to call it so, which I felt, yet whenever I came to look about me in the ship, it seemed against all warranty to cherish such emotions. For though the harpooneers, with the great body of the crew, were a far more barbaric, heathenish, and motley set than any of the tame merchant ship companies which my previous experience had made me acquainted with, still I ascribed this, and rightly ascribed it, to the fierce uniqueness of the very nature of that wild Scandinavian vocation, in which I had so abandonedly embarked. But it was especially the aspect of the three chief officers of the ship, the mates, which was most forcibly calculated to allay these colorless misgivings, and induce confidence and cheerfulness in every presentment of the voyage. Three better, more likely sea officers and men, each in his own different way, could not readily be found, and they were every one of them Americans. A Nantucketer, a Vingerder, a Cape Man. Now, it being Christmas when the ship shot from out her harbor, for a space we had biting polar weather, though all the time running away from it to the southward, and by every degree and minute of latitude which we sailed, gradually leaving that merciless winter and all its intolerable weather behind it. It was one of those less lowering but still gray and gloomy enough mornings of the transition, when with a fair wind the ship was rushing through the water with a vindictive sort of leaping and melancholy rapidity. But as I mounted to the deck at the call of the forenoon watch, so soon as I leveled my glance towards the taffrail, foreboding shivers ran over me. Reality outran apprehension. Captain Ahab stirred upon his quarterdeck. There seemed no sign of common bodily illness about him, nor of the recovery from any. He looked like a man cut away from the stake when the fire has overrunningly wasted all the limbs without consuming them, or taking away one particle from their compacted aged robustness. His whole high, broad form seemed made of solid bronze, and shaped in an unalterable mold, like Cellini's cast Perseus, threading its way out from among his gray hairs, and continuing right down one side of his tawny, scorched face and neck, till it disappeared in his clothing. You saw a slender, rod-like mark, lividly whitish. It resembled that perpendicular seam sometimes made in the straight, lofty trunk of a great tree when the upper lightning tearingly darts down it, and without wrenching a single twig, peels and grooves at the bark from top to bottom are running off into a soil, leaving the tree still greenly alive, but branded. Whether that mark was born with him, or whether it was the scar left by some desperate wound, no one could certainly say. By some tacit consent, throughout the voyage, little or no allusion was made to it, especially by the mates. But once Tashtego Sr., an old gay-head Indian among the crew, superstitiously asserted that not till he was full 40 years old did Ahab become that way branded, and that it came upon him, not in the fury of any mortal fray, but in an elemental strife at sea. Yet this wild hint seemed inferentially negatived by what a Grey Maxman insinuated, an old sepulchral man, who having never before sailed out of Nantucket, who'd never ere this laid eye upon wild Ahab. Nevertheless, the old sea traditions, the immemorial credulities, popularly invested this old Manxman with preternatural powers of discernment, so that no white sailor seriously contradicted him when he said that if ever Captain Ahab should be trimmed, which might hardly come to pass, so he muttered, then whoever should do that last office for the dead would find a birthmark on him from crown to sole. So powerfully did the whole grim aspect of Ahab affect me, and the livid brand which streaked it, that for the first few moments I hardly noted that not a little of this overbearing grimness was owing to the barbaric white leg upon which he partly stood. It had previously come to me that this ivory leg had at sea been fashioned from the polished bone of the sperm whale's jaw. "Aye, he was dismasted off Japan," said the old gay-head Indian once. But like his dismasted craft, he shipped another mast without coming home for it. He has a quiver of them. I was struck with the singular posture he made. Upon each side of the Pequod's quarterdeck, and pretty close to the mizzen shrouds, there was an auger hole, bored about half an inch or so into the plank. His bone leg steadied in that hole, one arm elevated, and holding by his shroud. Captain Ahab stood erect, looking straight out beyond the ship's ever-pitching prow. There was an infinity of firmest fortitude, a determinate, unsurrenderable willfulness, in the fixed and fearless, forward dedication of that glance. Not a word he spoke, nor did his officers say aught to him, though by all their minutest gestures and expressions, they plainly showed the uneasy, if not painful, consciousness of being under a troubled master eye. And not only that, but moody, stricken Ahab stood before them with a crucifixion in his face, in all the nameless, regal, overbearing dignity of some mighty woe. Ere long, from his first visit in the air, he withdrew into his cabin. But after that morning, he was every day visible to the crew, either standing in his pivot hole, or seated upon an ivory stool he had, or heavily walking the deck. As the sky grew less gloomy, indeed began to grow a little genial, he became still less and less a recluse, as if, when the ship had sailed from home, nothing but the dead, wintry bleakness of the sea had then kept him so secluded. And by and by it came to pass that he was almost continually in the air. But as yet, for all that he said, or perceptibly did, on the last sunny deck, he seemed as unnecessary there as another mast. But the Pequod was only making a passage now, not regularly cruising. Nearly all whaling preparatives needing supervision the mates were fully competent to, so that there was little or nothing out of himself to employ or excite Ahab now. And thus chase away, for that one interval, the clouds that layer upon layer were piled upon his brow, as ever all clouds choose the loftiest peaks to pile themselves upon. Nevertheless, ere long, the warm, warbling persuasiveness of the pleasant holiday weather seemed gradual to charm him from his mood. For, as when the red-cheeked dancing girls, April and May, trip home to the wintry misanthropic woods, even the barest, ruggedest, most thunder-cloven old oak will at least send forth some few sprouts to welcome such glad-hearted visit. So Ahab did, in the end, a little respond to the playful allurings of that girlish air. More than once did he put forth the faint blossom of a look, which in any other man would have soon flowered out in a smile. Chapter 29. Some days elapsed, and ice and icebergs all astern. The Pequod now went rolling through the bright Quito spring, which at sea almost perpetually reigns on the threshold of the eternal August of the tropic. The warmly cool, clear, ringing, perfumed, overflowing, redundant days were as crystal goblets of Persian sherbet, heaped up, flaked up, with rose-water snow. The starred and stately nights seemed haughty dames in jeweled velvets, nursing at home in lonely pride the memory of their absent conquering earls, the golden helmeted sons. For sleeping man, it was hard to choose between such winsome days and such seducing nights. But all the witcheries of that unwaning weather did not merely lend new spells and potencies to the outward world. Inward, they turned upon the soul, especially when the still mild hours of eve came on. Then memory shot her crystals as the clear ice, most forms of noiseless twilights. And all these subtle agencies, more and more they wrought on Ahab's texture. Old age is always wakeful, as if the longer linked with life, the less man has to do with aught that looks like death. Among sea commanders, the old graybeards will oftenest leave their berths to visit the night-cloaked deck. It was so with Ahab, only that now, of late, he seemed so much to live in the open air that, truly speaking, his visits were more to the cabin, and from the cabin to the planks. It feels like going down into one's tomb, he would mutter to himself, for an old captain like me to be descending this narrow scuttle to go to my grave-dug berth. So, almost every 24 hours, when the watches of the night were set, and the band on deck sentineled the slumbers of the band below, and when if a rope was to be hauled upon the forecastle, the sailors flung it not rudely down, as by day, but with some cautiousness dropped it to its place for fear of disturbing their slumbering shipmates. When this sort of steady quietude would begin to prevail, habitually the silent steersman would watch the cabin scuttle, and ere long the old man would emerge, gripping at the iron banister, to help his crippled way. Some considering touch of humanity was in him, for at times like these, he usually abstained from patrolling the quarterdeck, because to his wearied mates, seeking repose within 6 inches of his ivory heel, such would have been the reverberating crack and din of that bony step, that their dreams would have been on the crunching teeth of sharks. But once, the mood was on him too deep for common regardings. And as with heavy, lumber-like pace, he was measuring the ship from taffrail to mainmast, Stubb, the old second mate, came up from below, with a certain unassured, deprecating humorousness, hinted that if Captain Ahab was pleased to walk the planks, then no one could say nay. But there might be some way of muffling the noise, hinting something indistinctly and hesitatingly about a globe of toe and the insertion into it of the ivory heel. Ah, Stubb, thou didst not know Ahab then. Am I a cannonball, Stubb, said Ahab, that thou wouldst wad me that fashion? But go thy ways. I had forgot. Below to thy nightly grave, for such as ye sleep between shrouds, to use ye to the filling one at last. Down, dog, and kennel. Starting at the unforeseen concluding exclamation of the so suddenly scornful old man, Stubb was speechless a moment, then said excitedly, I am not used to be spoken to that way, sir. I do, but less than half like it, sir. Avast! Gritted Ahab between his set teeth, and violently moved as if to avoid some passionate temptation. No, sir, not yet, said Stubb, emboldened. I will not tamely be called a dog, sir. Then be called 10 times a donkey, and a mule, and an ass, and be gone, or I'll clear the world of thee. As he said this, Ahab advanced upon him with such overbearing terrors in his aspect that Stubb involuntarily retreated. I was never served so before without giving a hard blow for it, muttered Stubb as he found himself descending the cabin scuttle. It's very queer. Stop, Stubb. Somehow, now, I don't well know whether to go back and strike him. Well, what's that? Down here, on my knees and pray for him. Yes, that was the thought coming up in me. But it would be the first time I ever did pray. It's queer. Very queer. And he's queer too. Aye, take him fore and aft. He's about the queerest old man Stubb ever sailed with. How he flashed at me. His eyes like powder pans. Is he mad? Anyway, there's something on his mind, as sure as there must be something on a deck when it cracks. He ain't in his bed now, either more than 3 hours out of the 24. And he don't sleep then. Didn't that doughboy, the steward, tell me that of a morning, he always finds the old man's hammock clothes all rumpled and tumbled, and the sheets down at the foot, and the coverlid almost tied into knots. And the pillow of sort of frightful hot, as though a baked brick had been on it. A hot old man. I guess he's got what some folks ashore call a conscience. It's a kind of tick dollywell, they say. Worse nor a toothache. Well, I don't know what it is, but the Lord keep me from catching it. He's full of riddles. I wonder what he goes into the afterhold for every night, as Doughboy tells me he suspects. What's that for? I should like to know. Who's made appointments with him in the hold? Ain't that queer now? But there's no telling. It's the old game. Here goes first news. Damn me, it's worth a fellow's while to be born into the world, if only to fall right asleep. And now that I think of it, that's about the first thing babies do. And that's a sort of queer, too. Damn me, but all things are queer, come to think of them. But that's against my principles. Think not, is my 11th commandment. And sleep when you can is my 12th. So here goes again. Make the out.
One thing that...
But how's that? Didn't he call me a dog? Blazes. He called me 10 times a donkey and piled a lot of jackasses on top of that. He might as well have kicked me and done with it. Maybe he did kick me, and I didn't observe it. I was so taken all aback with his brow somehow. It flashed like a bleached bone. What the devil's the matter with me? I don't stand right on my legs. Coming afoul of that old man has a sort of turned me wrong side out. By the Lord, I must have been dreaming. Well, how? But the only way is to stash it. So here goes to hammock again. And in the morning, I'll see how this flaky juggling thinks over by daylight. Chapter 30. And stuff had departed. Ahab stood for a while, leaning over the bulwarks. And then, as had been usual with him of late, calling a sailor of the watch, he sent him below for his ivory stool and also his pipe. Lighting the pipe at the binnacle lamp and planting the stool on the weather side of the deck, he sat and smoked. In old Norse times, the thrones of the sea-loving Danish kings were fabricated, saith tradition, of the tusks of the narwhal. How could one look at Ahab then, seated on that tripod of bones, without bethinking him of the royalty it symbolized? For a Khan of the plank, and a king of the sea, and a great lord of Leviathans, was Ahab. Some moments passed, during which the thick vapor came from his mouth in quick and constant puffs, which blew back again into his face. How, now, he soliloquized at last, withdrawing the tube, this smoking no longer soothes. Oh, my pipe! Hard must it go with me, if thy charm be gone. Here have I been unconsciously, toiling, not pleasuring, and ignorantly smoking, to windward all the while. To windward? And with such nervous whiffs, as if, like the dying whale, my final jets were the strongest and fullest of trouble. What business have I with this pipe, this thing that is meant for sereneness, to send up mild white vapors among mild white hairs, not among torn iron gray locks like mine? I'll smoke no more. He tossed the still lighted pipe into the sea. The fire hissed in the waves. The same instant the ship shot by the bubble the sinking pipe made. Late with slouched hat, Ahab lurchingly paced the planks. Chapter 31. Next morning, Stubb accosted Flask. Such a queer dream, King Post, I never had. You know the old man's ivory leg? Well, I dreamed he kicked me with it. And when I tried to kick back, upon my soul. My little man. I kicked my leg right off. And then, presto, Ahab seemed a pyramid, and I, like a blazing fool, kept kicking at it. But what was still more curious, Flask, you know how curious all dreams are. Through all this rage that I was in, I somehow seemed to be thinking to myself that after all, it was not much of an insult. That kick from Ahab. Why? Think I. What's the row? It's not a real lead, only a false lead. And there's a mighty difference between a living thump and a dead thump. That's what makes a blow from the hand. Flask, 50 times more savage to bear than a blow from a cane. The living member that makes the living insult, my little man, and thinks I tied to myself all the while. Mind, while I was stubbing my silly toes against that cursed pyramid. So confoundedly contradictory was it all the while I say, I was thinking to myself, what's this like now? But a cane, a whalebone cane. Yes, thinks I. It was only a playful cudgeling. In fact, only a whaleboning that he gave me, not a base kick. Besides, thinks I, look at it once. Why, the end of it, the foot part, what a small sort of end it is. Whereas, if a broad-footed farmer kicked me, there's a devilish, broad insult. But this insult is whittled down to a point only. But now comes the greatest joke of the dream, Flask. While I was battering away at the pyramid, a sort of badger-haired old merman, with a hump on his back, takes me by the shoulders and slews me round. What are you about? Says he. Slid? Man, but I was frightened. Such a fizz. But somehow, next moment, I was over the fright. What am I about? Says I at last. And what business is that of yours? I should like to know, Mr. Humpback. Do you want a kick? By the Lord Flask, I had no sooner said that than he turned round his stern to me, bent over, and dragging up a lot of seaweed he had for a clout. What do you think I saw? Why, thunder alive, man. His stern was stuck full of marlin spines, with the points out. Says I, on second thoughts, I guess I won't kick you, old fellow. Wise stub, said he, wise stub, and kept muttering it all the time, a sort of eating of his own gums, like a chimney hat. Seeing he wasn't going to stop saying over his wise stub, I thought I might as well fall to kicking the pyramid again. But I had only just lifted my foot for it, when he roared out, Stop that kicking. Holloa, says I. What's the matter now, old fellow? Look ye here, say that he. Let's review the insult. Well, Captain Ahab kicked ye, didn't he? Yes, he did. Says I right here it was. Very good, says he. He used his ivory leg, didn't he? Yes, he did, says I. Well then, says he, why, stop. What have you to complain of? Didn't he kick with right goodwill? It wasn't a common pitch pine leg he kicked with, was it? No, you were kicked by a great man, and with a beautiful ivory leg stub. Stub's an honor. I consider it an honor. Listen, why, Stub, in old England, the greatest lords think it great glory to be slapped by a queen and made garter knights of water. Son, but be your boast, Stub, that ye were kicked by old Ahab and made a wise man of said. Remember what I say. Be kicked by him. Account his kicks honors, and on no account kick back, for you can't help yourself. Why, Stub, don't you see that pyramid? With that, he all of a sudden seemed somehow, in some queer fashion, to swim off into the air. I snored, rolled over, and there I was in my hammock. Now, what do you think of that dream, Flask? Flask? I don't know. It seems a sort of foolish to me, though. Maybe. But it's made a wise man of me, Flask. Do you see Ahab standing there, sideways looking over the stern? Well, the best thing you can do,
Flask, is to let the old man alone.
never speak to him, whatever he says. Aloha. What's that he shouts? Hark, masthead there. Look sharp, all of ye. There are whales hereabouts. If you see a white one, split your lungs for him. What do you think of that now, Flask? Aren't there a small drop of something queer about that? A white whale? Did you mark that, man? Look ye, there's something special in the wind. Stand by for it, Flask. Ahab has that's bloody on his mind. But, Mom, he comes this way. Chapter 32. Already, we are boldly launched upon the deep, but soon we shall be lost in its unshored, harborless immensities. Ere that come to pass, ere the Pequod's weedy hull rolls side by side with the barnacled hulls of the Leviathan. At the outset, it is but well to attend to a matter almost indispensable to a thorough appreciative understanding of the more special Leviathanic revelations of all sorts which are to follow. What's the big feat of the whale? He said news only become from the furl of the Bering, Academy, and the population. Yet is it no easy task. The classification of the constituents of a chaos, nothing less is here essayed. Listen to what the best and latest authorities have laid down. No branch of zoology is so much involved as that which is entitled Cetology, says Captain Scoresby, A.D. 1820. It is not my intention, were it in my power, to enter into the inquiry as to the true method of dividing the cetacea into groups and families. Impenetrable veil covering our knowledge of the cetacea. A field strewn with thorns. All these incomplete indications that serve to torture us naturalists. Thus speak of the whale, the great Cuvier,
and John Hunter, and lessen those lights of zoology and anatomy.
Nevertheless, though of real knowledge there be little, yet of books there are plenty. And so, in some small degree with cetology or the science of whales, many are the men, small and great, old and new, landsmen and seamen, for that large, poor, and little, written of the whale. Run over a few. The authors of the Bible, Aristotle, Pliny, Aldrovandi. But to what ultimate generalizing purpose all these have written, the above cited extracts will show. Of the names in this list of whale authors, only those following Owen ever saw living whales. And but one of them was a real professional harpooner and whaleman. I mean Captain Scoresby, on the separate subject of the Greenland or right whale. He is the best existing authority. But Scoresby knew nothing, and says nothing of the great sperm whale, compared with which the Greenland whale is almost unworthy. And here be it said that the Greenland whale is an usurper upon the throne of the seas. He is not even by any means the largest of the whales, yet, owing to the long priority of his claims and the profound ignorance which, till some 70 years back, invested the then fabulous or utterly unknown sperm whale, in which ignorance to this present day still reigns in all but some few scientific retreats and whale ports. This usurpation has been every way complete. Reference to nearly all the Leviathanic allusions in the great poets of past days will satisfy you that the Greenland whale, without one rival, was to them the monarch of the seas. But the time has at last come for a new proclamation. This is Charing Cross. Hear you, good people all. The Greenland whale is deposed. The great sperm whale now reigneth. There are only 2 books in being which at all pretend to put the living sperm whale before you, and at the same time, in the remotest degree, succeed in the attempt. Those books are Beale's and Bennett's, both in their time surgeons to English South Sea whale ships, and both exact and reliable men. The original matter touching the sperm whale to be found in their volumes is necessarily small. But so far as it goes, it is of excellent quality, though mostly confined to scientific description. As yet, however, the sperm whale scientific or poetic lives not complete in any literature. Far above all other hunted whales, his ability is an unwritten life. Now, the various species of whales need some sort of popular comprehensive classification, if only an easy outline, one for the present, hereafter to be filled in all its departments by subsequent laborers. As no better man advances to take this matter in hand, I hereupon offer my own poor endeavors. I promise nothing complete, because any human thing supposed to be complete must, for that very reason, infallibly be faulty. I shall not pretend to a minute anatomical description of the various species, or, in this place at least, to much of any description. My object here is simply to project the draught of a systematization of cetology. I am the architect, not the builder, but it is a ponderous task. No ordinary letter sorter in the post office is equal to it. To grope down into the bottom of the sea after them, to have one's hands among the unspeakable foundations, ribs, and very pelvis of the world. This is a fearful thing. What am I that I should essay to hook the nose of this Leviathan? The awful tauntings in Job might well appall me. Will he make a covenant with thee? Behold, the hope of him is vain. But I have swam through libraries and sailed through oceans. I've had to do with whales, with these visible hands. I am in earnest, and I will try. There are some preliminaries to settle. First, the uncertain, unsettled condition of the science of cetology is in the very vestibule attested by the fact that in some quarters it still remains a moot point whether a whale be a fish. In his System of Nature, A.D. 1776, Linnaeus declares, I hereby separate the whales from the fish. But of my own knowledge, I know that down to the year 1850, sharks and shad, alewives and herring, against Linnaeus's express edict, were still found dividing the possession of the same seas with the Leviathan. The grounds upon which Linnaeus would fain have banished the whales from the waters, he states as follows: on account of their warm bilocular heart, their lungs, their movable eyelids, their hollow ears, penem intrantem feminam mamis lectentem, and finally ex lege natri juri narratok. I submitted all this to my friends Simeon Macy and Charlie Coffin of Nantucket, both messmates of mine in a certain voyage, and they united in the opinion that the reasons set forth were altogether insufficient. Charlie profanely hinted they were humbug. Be it known that, waiving all argument, I take the good old-fashioned ground that the whale is a fish and call upon holy Jonah to back me. This fundamental thing settled, the next point is, in what internal respect does the whale differ from other fish? Above, Linnaeus has given you those items. But in brief, they are these: lungs and warm blood, whereas all other fish are lungless and cold-blooded. Next, how shall we define the whale? By his obvious externals, so as conspicuously to label him for all time to come. To be short, then, a whale is a spouting fish with a horizontal tail. There you have it. However, contracted, that definition is the result of expanded meditation. A walrus spouts much like a whale, but the walrus is not a fish because he is amphibious. But the last term of the definition is still more cogent, as coupled with the first. Almost anyone must have noticed that all the fish familiar to landsmen have not a flat, but a vertical or up and down tail, whereas among spouting fish the tail, though it may be similarly shaped, invariably assumes a horizontal position. But the above definition of what a whale is, I do by no means exclude from the Leviathanic Brotherhood any sea creature hitherto identified with the whale by the best informed Nantucketers, nor, on the other hand, link with it any fish hitherto authoritatively regarded as alien. Hence, all the smaller spouting and horizontal-tailed fish must be included in this ground plan of cetology. Now then come the grand divisions of the entire whale host. I am aware that down to the present time, the fish diawametons and dugongs are included by many naturalists among the whales. But as these pigfish are a noisy, contemptible set, mostly lurking in the mouths of rivers and feeding on wet hay, and especially as they do not spout, I deny their credentials as whales, and have presented them with their passports to quit the kingdom of cetology. This whale, among the English of old, vaguely known as the trumpeter whale, and the physeter whale, and the anvil-headed whale, is the present cachalot of the French, and the potfish of the Germans, and the macrocephalus of the longword. He is, without doubt, the largest inhabitant of the globe, the most formidable of all whales to encounter, the most majestic in aspect, and lastly, by far the most valuable in commerce. He being the only creature from which that valuable substance, spermaceti, is obtained. All his peculiarities will in many other places be enlarged upon. It is chiefly with his name that I now have to do. Philologically considered, it is absurd. Some centuries ago, when the sperm whale was almost wholly unknown in his own proper individuality, and when his oil was only accidentally obtained from the stranded fish. In those days, spermaceti, it would seem, was popularly supposed to be derived from a creature identical with the one then known in England as the Greenland or right whale. It was the idea also that this same spermaceti was that quickening humor of the Greenland whale, which the first syllable of the word literally expresses. In those times also, spermaceti was exceedingly scarce, not being used for light, but only as an ointment and medicament. It was only to be had from the druggists, as you nowadays buy an ounce of rhubarb. Yen as I opinage, in the course of time, the true nature of spermaceti became known. Its original name is still retained by the dealers, no doubt to enhance its value by a notion so strangely significant of its scarcity. And so the appellation must at last have come to be bestowed upon the whale, from which this spermaceti really derived. In one respect, this is the most venerable of the leviathans, being the one first regularly hunted by man. It yields the article commonly known as whalebone or baleen, and the oil specially known as whale oil, an inferior article in commerce. Among the fishermen, he is indiscriminately designated by all the following titles: the whale, the Greenland whale, the black whale, the great whale, the true whale, the right whale. There is a deal of obscurity concerning the identity of the species, thus multitudinously baptized. What then is the whale? which I include in the second species of my folio. It is the great mysticetus of the English naturalists, the Greenland whale of the English whaleman, the Baleine ordinaire of the French whaleman, the Growlands wild fish of the Swedes. It is the whale which for more than 2 centuries past has been hunted by the Dutch and English in the Arctic seas. It is the whale which the American fishermen have long pursued in the Indian Ocean, on the Brazil banks, on the Northwest coast, and various other parts of the world, designated by them right whale cruising ground. Some pretend to see a difference between the Greenland whale of the English and the right whale of the Americans, but they precisely agree in all their grand features, nor has there yet been presented a single determinate fact upon which to ground a radical distinction. It is by endless subdivisions, based upon the most inconclusive differences, that some work of natural history becomes so repellingly intricate. The right whale will be elsewhere treated at some length with reference to elucidating the sperm whale. Under this head, I reckon a monster, which, by the various names of finback, tallspout, and long john, has been seen almost in every sea and is commonly the whale whose distant jet is so often described by passengers crossing the Atlantic in the New York packet tracks. In the lank Theatanes, and in his baleen, the finback resembles the right whale, but is of a less portly girth and a lighter color, approaching to olive. His great lips present a cable-like aspect, formed by the intertwisting, slanting folds of large wrinkles. His grand distinguishing feature, the fin from which he derives his name, is often a conspicuous object. This fin is some 3 or 4 feet long, growing vertically from the hinder part of the back, of an angular shape with a very sharp point. Even if not the slightest other part of the creature be visible, this isolated fin will at times be seen plainly projecting from the surface. When the sea is moderately calm and slightly marked with spherical ripples, and this gnomon-like fin stands up and casts shadows upon the wrinkled surface, it may well be supposed that the watery circle surrounding it somewhat resembles a dial, with its style and wavy hour lines graved on it. On that Ahaz, dial the shadow often goes back. The finback is not gregarious. He seems a whale hater, as some men are man haters, very shy, always going solitary, unexpectedly rising to the surface and the remotest and most sullen waters. His straight and single lofty jet, rising like a tall, misanthropic spear upon a barren plain, gifted with such wondrous power and velocity in swimming as to defy all present pursuit from man. This Leviathan seems the banished and unconquerable Cain of his race, bearing for his mark that style upon his back. From having the baleen in his mouth, the finback is sometimes included with the right whale, among a theoretic species denominated whalebone whales, that is, whales with baleen. Of these so-called whalebone whales, there would seem to be several varieties, most of which, however, are little known. Broad-nosed whales and beaked whales, with pike-headed whales, bunched whales, underjawed whales, and rostrated whales are the fishermen's names for a few sorts. In connection with this appellative of whalebone whales, it is of great importance to mention that, however, such a nomenclature may be convenient in facilitating allusions to some kind of whales, yet it is in vain to attempt a clear classification of the Leviathan, founded upon either his baleen, or hump, or fin, or teeth. Notwithstanding that those marked parts or features very obviously seem better adapted to afford the basis for a regular system of cetology than any other detached bodily distinctions, which the whale, in his kinds presents. How then? The baleen, hump, back fin, and teeth. These are things whose peculiarities are indiscriminately dispersed among all sorts of whales, without any regard to what may be the nature of their structure in other and more essential particulars. Thus, the sperm whale and the humpbacked whale. Each has a hump, but there the similitude ceases. Then, this same humpbacked whale and the Greenland whale, each of these has baleen. But there again, the similitude. And it is just the same with the other parts above mentioned. In various sorts of whales, they form such irregular combinations, or, in the case of any one of them, detached, such an irregular isolation, as utterly to defy all general methodization formed upon such a basis. On this rock, every one of the whale naturalists has split, but it may possibly be conceived that in the internal parts of the whale, in his anatomy, there, at least, we shall be able to hit the right classification. Nay, what thing, for example, is there in the Greenland whale's anatomy more striking than his baleen? Yet we have seen that by his baleen it is impossible correctly to classify the Greenland whale. And if you descend into the bowels of the various leviathan, why there you will not find distinctions of 50th part as available to the systematizer as those external ones already enumerated. What then remains? Nothing but to take hold of the whales bodily, in their entire liberal volume, and boldly sort them that way. And this is the bibliographical system here adopted. And it is the only one that can possibly succeed, for it alone is practicable. This whale is often seen on the northern American coast. He has been frequently captured there and towed into harbor. He has a great pack on him like a peddler, or you might call him the elephant and castle whale. At any rate, the popular name for him does not sufficiently distinguish him, since the sperm whale also has a hump through a smaller one. His oil is not very valuable. He has baleen. He is the most gamesome and light-hearted of all the whales, making more day foam and light water generally than any other of them. Of this whale, little is known but his name. I have seen him at a distance off Cape Horn. Of a retiring nature, he eludes both hunters and philosophers. Though no coward, he has never yet shown any part of him but his back, which rises in a long, sharp ridge. How'd him go? I know little more of him, nor does anybody else. Another retiring gentleman with a brimstone belly, doubtless got by scraping along the Tartarian tiles in some of his profounder divings. He is seldom seen. At least I have never seen him, except in the remoter southern seas, and then always at too great distance to study his countenance. He is never chased. He would run away with rope blocks of lime. Prodigies are told of him. A Jew suffer bottom. I can say nothing more that is true of ye, nor can the oldest Nantucketer. Why this Book of Whales is not denominated de Quarto is very plain. Because while the whales of this order, though smaller than those of the former order, nevertheless retain a proportionate likeness to them in figure, yet the bookbinder's quarto volume, in its dimension form, does not preserve the shape of the folio volume, but the octavo volume does. Though the fish, whose loud sonorous breathing, or rather blowing, has furnished a proverb to Lansdowne, is so well known a denizen of the deep, yet is he not popularly classed among them, but possessing all the grand, distinctive features of the Leviathan. Most naturalists have recognized him for one. He is of moderate octavo size, varying from 15 to 25 feet in length, and of corresponding dimensions round the waist. He swims in herds. He is never regularly hunted, though his oil is considerable in quantity and pretty good for light. By some fishermen, his approach is regarded as premonitory of the advance of the great sperm whale. I give the popular fishermen's names for all these fish, for generally they are the best. Where any name happens to be vague or inexpressive, I shall say so, and suggest another. I do so now, touching the black fish, so called, because blackness is the rule among almost all whales. So, call him the hyena whale, if you please. His voracity is well known, and from the circumstance that the inner angles of his lips are curved upwards, he carries an everlasting Mephistophelian grin on his face. This whale averages some 16 or 18 in length. He's found in almost all latitudes. He has a peculiar way of showing his dorsal hooked fin in swimming, which looks something like a Roman nose. When not more profitably employed, the sperm whale hunters sometimes capture the hyena whale to keep up the supply of cheap oil for domestic employment, as some frugal housekeepers, in the absence of company and quite alone by themselves, burn unsavory tallow instead of odorous wax. Though their blubber is very thin, some of these whales will yield you upwards of 30 gallons of oil. Another instance of a curiously named whale, so named I suppose from his peculiar horn being originally mistaken for a peaked nose. The creature is some 16 feet in length, while its horn averages 5 feet, though some exceed 10, and even attain to 15 feet. Strictly speaking, this horn is but a lengthened tusk, growing out from the jaw in a line, a little depressed from the horizontal. But it is only found on the sinister side, which has an ill effect, giving its owner something analogous to the aspect of a clumsy left-handed man. What precise purpose this ivory horn or lance answers, it would be hard to say. It does not seem to be used like the blade of the swordfish and billfish, though some sailors tell me that the narwhal employs it for a rake in turning over the bottom of the sea for food. Charlie Coffin said it was used for an ice piercer. For the narwhal, rising to the surface of the polar sea and finding it sheeted with ice, thrusts his horn up and so breaks through. But you cannot prove either of these surmises on the surmises to be correct. My own opinion is that, however, this one-sided horn may really be used by the narwhal. However that may be, it would certainly be very convenient to him for a folder in reading pamphlets. The narwhal I have heard called the tusked whale, the horned whale, and the unicorn whale. He is certainly a curious example of the unicornism to be found in almost every kingdom of animated nature. From certain cloistered old authors, I have gathered that this same sea unicorn's horn was in ancient days regarded as the great antidote against poison, and as such, preparations of it brought immense prices. It was also distilled to a volatile salts for fainting ladies, the same way that the horns of the male deer are manufactured into hartshorn. Originally, it was in itself accounted an object of great curiosity. Fackletter tells me that Sir Martin Frobisher, on his return from that voyage, when Queen Bess did gallantly wave her jeweled hand to him from a window of Greenwich Palace, as his bold ship sailed down the Thames. When Sir Martin returned from that voyage, saith black letter, on bended knees he presented to her highness a prodigious long horn of the North, which for a long period after hung in the castle at Windsor. An Irish author avers that the Earl of Leicester, on bended knees, did likewise present to the highness of her highness, and another horn, pertaining to a land beast of a unicorn nature. The narwhal has a very picturesque, leopard-like look, being of a milk-white ground color, dotted with round and oblong spots of black. His oil is very superior, clear, and fine, but there is little of it, and he is seldom hunted. He is mostly found in the circumpolar seas. Of this, whale little is precisely known to the Nantucketer, and nothing at all to the professed naturalist. From what I have seen of him in the distance, I should say that he was about the bigness of a grampus. He's very savage, a sort of Fiji fish. He sometimes takes the great folio whales by the lip and hangs there like a leash till the mighty brute is worried to death. The killer's never hunted. I never heard what sort of oil he has. Exception might be taken to the name to start upon this whale on the ground of its indistinctness, for we are all killers, on land and on sea, Bonapartes and sharks included. This gentleman is famous for his tail, which he uses for a ferrule in thrashing his foes. He mounts the folio whale's back, and as he swims, he works his passage by flogging him. As some schoolmasters get along in the world by a similar process, still less is known of the thrasher than of the killer. Both are outlaws, even in the lawless seas. These include the smaller whales. To those who have not chanced especially to study the subject, it may possibly seem strange that fishes not commonly exceeding 4 or 5 feet should be marshaled among whales, a word which, in the popular sense, always conveys an idea of hugeness. But the creatures set down above as duodecimers are infallibly whales by the terms of my definition of what a whale is, i.e., a spouting fish with a horizontal tail. This is the common porpoise found almost all over the globe. The name is of my own bestowal, for there are more than one sort of porpoises, and something must be done to distinguish them. I call him thus, because he always swims in hilarious shoals, which upon the broad sea keep tossing themselves to heaven, like caps in a 4th of July crowd. Their appearance is generally hailed with delight by the mariner. Full of fine spirits, they invariably come from the breezy billows to windward. They are the lads that always live before the wind. They are accounted a lucky omen. If you yourself can withstand 3 cheers at beholding these vivacious fish, the spirit of godly damesomeness is not in ye. A well-fed, plump porpoise will yield you 1 good gallon of good oil. But the fine and delicate fluid extracted from his jaws is exceedingly valuable. It is in request among jewelers and watchmakers. Sailors put it on their homes. Porpoise meat is good eating. You know, it may never have occurred to you that a porpoise spouts. Indeed, his spout is so small that it is not very readily discernible. But the next time you have a chance, watch him, and you will then see the great sperm whale himself in miniature. He's only found, I think, in the Pacific. He is somewhat larger than the Huzzah porpoise, but much of the same general make. Provoke him, and he will buckle to a shark. I have lowered for him many times, but never yet saw him captured. Pocket, the largest kind of porpoise, and only found in the Pacific, so far as it is known. The only English name by which he has hitherto been designated is that of the fishers. Right whale porpoise, from the circumstance that he is chiefly found in the vicinity of that folio. In shape, he differs in some degree from the Huzzah porpoise, being of a less rotund and jolly girth. Indeed, he's of quite a neat and gentlemanlike figure. He has no fins on his back. He has a lovely tail, and sentimental Indian eyes of a hazel hue. But his mealy mouth spoils all. Though his entire back down to his side fins is of a deep sable, yet a boundary line, distinct as the mark in a ship's hull, called the bright waist. That line streaks him from stem to stern, with 2 separate colors, black above and white below. The white comprises part of his head and the whole of his mouth. which makes him look as if he had just escaped from the felonious visit to a meal bag. A most mean and kneeling aspect. His boil is much like that of the common porpoise. Above, you have all the leviathans of, but there are a rabble of uncertain, fugitive, half-fabulous whales,
which as an American whaleman, I know by reputation.
I shall enumerate them by their forecastle appellation, for possibly such a list may be valuable to future investigators, who may complete what I have here but begun. If any of the following whales shall hereafter be caught and marked, then he can readily be incorporated into this system, according to his folio, octavo, or duodecimo magnitude. The bottlenose whale, the junk whale, the pudding-headed whale, the Cape whale, the leading whale, the cannon whale, the scrab whale, the coppered whale, the elephant whale, the iceberg whale, the quag whale, the blue whale, etc. From Icelandic, Dutch, and Old English authorities, there might be quoted other lists of uncertain whales, blessed with all manner of uncouth, but I omit them as altogether obsolete, and can hardly help suspecting them from mere sounds, full of leviathanism, but signifying nothing. Finally, it was stated at the outset that the system would not be here, and at once perfected. We cannot but plainly see that I have kept my word. But I now leave my cetological system standing thus unfinished, even as the great cathedral of Cologne was left, with the crane still standing upon the top of the uncompleted tower. For small erections may be finished by their first architects. Grand ones, true ones, ever leave the copestone to posterity. God keep me from ever completing anything. This whole book is but a draft, nay, but the draft of a draft. Oh, time, strength, cash, and patience. Chapter 33. Concerning the officers of the whalecraft, this seems as good a place as any to set down a little domestic peculiarity on shipboard, arising from the existence of the harpooner class of officers, a class unknown, of course, in any other marine than the whale fleet. The large importance attached to the harpooner's vocation is evinced by the fact that originally in the old Dutch fishery, 2 centuries and more ago, the command of a whale ship was not wholly lodged in the person now called the captain, but was divided between him and an officer called the specksnider. Literally, this word means fat cutter. Usage, however, in time made it equivalent to chief harpooner. In those days, the captain's authority was restricted to the navigation and general management of the vessel, while over the whale hunting department and all its concerns, the specksnider or chief harpooner reigned supreme. In the British Greenland fishery, under the corrupted title of specksioneer, this old Dutch official is still retained, but his former dignity is sadly abridged. At present, he ranks simply as senior harpooner, and as such, is but one of the captain's more inferior subalterns. Nevertheless, as upon the good conduct of the harpooneers, the success of a whaling voyage largely depends. And since in the American fishery, he is not only an important officer in the boat, but under certain circumstances, night watches on a whaling ground, the command of the ship's deck is also his. Therefore, the grand political maxim of the sea demands that he should nominally live apart from the men before the mast, and be in some way distinguished as their professional superior, though always by them familiarly regarded as their social. Now, the grand distinction drawn between officer and man at sea is this: the first lives aft, the last forward. Hence, in whale ships and merchantmen alike, the mates have their quarters with the captain. And so too, in most of the American whalers, the harpooneers are lodged in the after part of the ship. That is to say, they take their meals in the captain's cabin and sleep in a place indirectly communicating with it. Though a long period of a southern whaling voyage, by far the longest of all voyages now or ever made by man, the peculiar perils of it, and the community of interest prevailing among the company, all of whom hire well, depend for their profits not upon fixed wages, but upon their common luck, together with their common vigilance, intrepidity, and hard work. Though all these things do, in some cases, tend to beget a less rigorous discipline than in merchantmen generally. Yet, never mind how much, like an old Mesopotamian family, these whalemen may, in some primitive instances, live together. For all that, the punctilious externals, at least, of the quarterdeck are seldom materially relaxed, and in no instance done away. Indeed, many are the Nantucket ships in which you will see the skipper parading his quarterdeck with an elated grandeur not surpassed in any military navy. Nay, extorting almost as much outward homage as if he wore the imperial purple and not the shabbiest of pilot cloth. And though of all men, the moody captain of the Pequod was the least given to that sort of shallowest assumption, and though the only homage he ever exacted was implicit, instantaneous obedience, though he required no man to remove the shoes from his feet ere stepping upon the quarterdeck, and though there were times when, owing to peculiar circumstances connected with events hereafter to be detailed, he addressed them in unusual terms, whether of condescension or in terrorem, yet even Captain Ahab was by no means unobservant of the paramount forms and uses. Nor, perhaps, will it fail to be eventually perceived that behind those forms and usages, as it were, he sometimes masked himself, incidentally making use of them for other and more private ends than they were legitimately intended to subserve. That certain sultanism of his brain, which had otherwise in a good degree remained unmanifested, through those forms, that the same sultanism became incarnate in an irresistible dictatorship. For be a man's intellectual superiority what it will, it can never assume the practical, available supremacy over other men. Without the aid of some sort of external arts and entrenchments, always in themselves more or less paltry and base. This is that forever keeps God's true princes of the empire from the world's hustings, and leaves the highest honors that this air can give to those men who become famous more, through their infinite inferiority to the choice hidden handful of the divine in earth, than through their unbounded superiority over the dead level of the mass. Such large virtue lurks in these small things when extreme political superstitions invest them, that in some royal instances, even to idiot imbecility, they have imparted potency. But when, as in the case of Nicholas the Tsar, the ringed crown of geographical empire encircles an imperial brain, then the plebeian herds crouch abased before the tremendous centralization. Nor will the tragic dramatist who would depict mortal indomitableness in its fullest sweep and direct swing ever forget a hint incidentally so important in his art as the one now alluded to. But Ahab, my captain, still moves before me in all his Nantucket grimness and shagginess. And in this episode touching emperors and kings, I must not conceal that I have only to do with a poor old whale hunter like him. And, therefore, all our majestical trappings and housings are denied me. Oh, Ahab, what shall be grand in thee? It must needs to be plucked at from the skies, and dived him in the deep, and featured in the unbodied air. Chapter 34. It is noon, and Doughboy, the steward, thrusting his pale loaf of bread face from the cabin scuttle, announces dinner to his lord and master, who's sitting in the lee quarter boat, has just been taking an observation of the sun, and is now mutely reckoning the latitude on the smooth medallion-shaped tablet, reserved for that daily purpose on the upper part of his ivory leg. From his complete inattention to the tidings, you would think that moody Ahab had not heard his meaning. But presently, catching hold of the knees and shrouds, he swings himself to the deck, and, in an even, unexhilarated voice, saying, "Dinner, Mr. Starbuck," disappears into the cabin. When the last echo of his sultan step has died away, and Starbuck, the first Emir, has every reason to suppose that he is seated, then Starbuck rouses from his quietude, takes a few turns along the planks, and after a grave peep into the binnacle, says with some touch of pleasantness, "Dinner, Mr. Stubb," and descends the scuttle. The second Emir lounges about the rigging a while, and then slightly shaking the main brace to see whether it will be all right with that important rope, he likewise takes up the old burden, and with a rapid "Dinner, Mr. Flask," follows after his predecessor. But the third Emir, now seeing himself all alone on the quarter-deck, seems to feel relieved from some curious restraint, for tipping all sorts of knowing winks in all sorts of directions, and kicking off his shoes, he strikes into a sharp but noiseless squall of a hornpipe right over the Grand Turk's head. And then, by a dexterous sleight, pitching his cap up into the mizentop for a shelf, he goes down rollicking so far, at least as he remains visible from the deck, remersing all other processions by bringing up the rear with music, but are stepping into the cabin doorway below. He pauses, ships a new face altogether. And then, independent, hilarious little Flask enters King Ahab's presence in the character of Abjectus, or the slave. It is not the least among the strange things bred by the intense artificialness of sea usages, that while in the open air of the deck, some officers will, upon provocation, bear themselves boldly and defyingly enough towards their commander. Yet, 10-1, let those very officers the next moment go down to their customary dinner in that same commander's cabin. And straightway, their inoffensive, not to say deprecatory and humble air towards him as he sits at the head of the table. This is marvelous, sometimes most comical. Wherefore this difference? The problem? Perhaps not. To have been Belshazzar, king of Babylon, and to have been Belshazzar, not haughtily, but courteously. Therein, certainly, must have been some touch of mundane grandeur. But he who in the rightly regal and intelligent spirit presides over his own private dinner table of invited guests, that man's unchallenged power and dominion of individual influence for the time, that man's royalty of state transcends Belshazzar's. For Belshazzar was not the greatest, who has but once dined his friends, has tasted what it is to be Caesar. It is a lichery of social tarset, which there is no withstanding. Now, if to this consideration you superadd the official supremacy of a shipmaster, then, by inference, you will derive the cause of that peculiarity of sea life just mentioned. Over his ivory inlaid table, Ahab presided like a mute named sea lion on the white coral beach, surrounded by his warlike but still deferential cubs. In his own proper turn, each officer waited to be served. They were as little children before Ahab, and yet in Ahab there seemed not to lurk the smallest social arrogance. With one mind, their intent eyes all fastened upon the old man's knife as he carved the chief dish before him. I do not suppose that for the world they would have profaned that moment with the slightest observation, even upon so neutral a topic as the weather. No. And when reaching out his knife and fork, between which the slice of beef was locked, Ahab thereby motioned Starbuck's plate towards him. The mate received his meat as though receiving alms, and cut it tenderly. And a little started, if, perchance, the knife grazed against the plate, and chewed it noiselessly, and swallowed it, not without circumspection. For like the coronation banquet at Frankfurt, where the German emperor profoundly dines with the 7 imperial electors, so these cabin meals were somehow solemn meals, eaten in awful silence. And yet at table old Ahab forbade not conversation. Only he himself was dumb. What a relief it was to choking Stubb when a rat made a sudden racket in the hold below. And poor little Flask, he was the youngest son and little boy of this weary family party. His were the shin bones of the saline beef. His would have been the drumsticks. For Flask to have presumed to help himself, this must have seemed to him tantamount to larceny in the first degree. Had he helped himself at that table, doubtless, never more would he have been able to hold his head up in this honest world. Nevertheless, strange to say, Ahab never forbade him, and had Flask helped himself, the chances were Ahab had never so much as noticed it. Least of all did Flask presume to help himself to butter. Whether he thought the owners of the ship denied it to him, on account of its clotting, his clear, sunny complexion, or whether he deemed that, in so long a voyage in such marketless waters, butter was at a premium, and therefore wasn't for him, a subaltern. However it was, Flask, alas, was a butterless man. Another thing, Flask was the last person down at the dinner, and Flask is the first man up. Consider, for hereby, Flask's dinner was badly jammed in point of time. While Starbuck and Stubb both have the start of him, and yet they also have the privilege of lounging in the rear. If Stubb, even who's but a peg higher than Flask, happens to have but a small appetite, and soon shows symptoms of concluding his repast, then Flask must bestir himself. He will not get more than 3 mouthfuls that day, for it is against holy usage for Stubb to precede Flask to the deck. Therefore it was that Flask once admitted in private, but ever since he had arisen to the dignity of an officer. From that moment, he had never known what it was to be otherwise than hungry, more or less. For what he ate did not so much relieve his hunger as keep it immortal in him. Peace and satisfaction, thought Flask, have forever departed from my stomach. I'm an officer, but how I wish I could fish a bit of old-fashioned beef in the forecastle, as I used to when I was before the mast. There's the fruits of promotion now. There's the vanity of glory. There's the insanity of life. Besides, if it were so that any mere sailor of the Pequod had a grudge against Flask in Flask's official capacity, all that sailor had to do, in order to obtain ample vengeance, was to go aft at dinner time, and get a peep at Flask through the cabin skylight, sitting silly and dumbfoundered before awful Ahab. Now Ahab and his 3 mates formed what may be called the first table in the Pequod's cabin. After their departure, taking place in inverted order to their arrival, the canvas cloth was cleared, or rather was restored to some hurried order by the pallid steward. And then the 3 harpooneers were bidden to the feast, they being its residuary legatees. They made a sort of temporary servants' hall of the high and mighty cabin, in strange contrast to the hardly tolerable constraint and nameless invisible domineerings of the captain's table, was the entire carefree license and the almost frantic democracy of those inferior fellows, the harpooneers, while their masters, the mates, seemed afraid of the sound of the hinges of their own jaws. The harpooneers chewed their food with such a relish that there was a report to it. They dined like lords. They filled their bellies like Indian ships all day loading with spices. Such portentous appetites had Queequeg and Tashago that to fill out the vacancies made by the previous repast. Often, the pale doughboy was fain to bring on a great baron of salt junk, seemingly quarried out of the solid ox. And if he were not lively about it, if he did not go with a nimble hop, skip, and jump, then Tashtego had an ungentlemanly way of accelerating him by darting a fork at his back, harpoon-wide. And once Dagu, seized with a sudden humor, assisted Doughboy's memory by snatching him up bodily, and thrusting his head into a great empty wooden trencher, what Tashtego, knife in hand, began laying out the circle preliminary to scalping him. He was naturally a very nervous, shuddering sort of little fellow, this bread-faced steward, the progeny of a bankrupt baker and a hospital nurse, and what with the standing spectacle of the black terrific Ahab, and the periodical tumultuous visitations of these three savages, Doughboy's whole life was one continual lip quiver. Commonly, after seeing the harpooneers furnished with all things they demanded, he would escape from their clutches into his little pantry adjoining, and fearfully peep out at them through the blinds of its door, till all was over. It was a sight to see Queequeg seated over against Tashtego, opposing his filed teeth to the Indians. Crosswise to them, Dagu seated on the floor, for a bench would have brought his hearse-plumed head to the low car lines, at every motion of his colossal limbs making the low cabin framework to shake, as when an African elephant goes passenger in a ship. But for all is, the great Negro was wonderfully abstemious, not to say dainty. It seemed hardly possible that by such comparatively small mouthfuls he could keep up the vitality diffused through so blond, baronial, and superb a person. But doubtless, this noble savage fed strong and drank deep of the abounding element of air, and, through his dilated nostrils, snuffed in the sublime life of the worlds, not by beef or by bread, are giants made or nourished, but Queequeg, he had a mortal, barbaric smack of the lip in eating, an ugly sound enough. So much so, that the trembling doughboy almost looked to see whether any marks of teeth lurked in his own lean arms. And when he would hear Tashtego singing out for him to produce himself, that his bones might be picked, the simple-witted steward all but shattered the crockery hanging round him in the pantry by his sudden fits of the palsy. Nor did the whetstone, which the harpooneers carried in their pockets, for their lances and other weapons, and with which whetstones, at dinner, they would ostentatiously sharpen their knives, that grating sound did not at all tend to tranquilize poor doughboy. How could he forget that in his island days, Queequeg, for one, must certainly have been guilty of some murderous convivial indiscretions? Alas, doughboy, hard fares the white waiter who waits upon cannibals. Not a napkin should he carry on his arm, but a buckler. In good time, though, to his great delight, the three salt sea warriors would rise and depart. To his credulous, fable-mongering ears, all their martial bones jingling at every step, like Moorish cimeters and scabbards. That though these barbarians dined in the cabin and nominally lived there, still being anything but sedentary in their habits, they were scarcely ever in it, except at mealtimes, and just before sleeping time, when they passed through it to their own peculiar quarters. In this one matter, Ahab seemed to be no exception to most American whale captains, who, as a set, rather inclined to the opinion that by rights the ship's cabin belongs to them, and that it is by courtesy alone that anybody else is at any time permitted there. So that, in real truth, the mates and harpooneers of the Pequod might more properly be said to have lived out of the cabin than in it. For when they did enter it, it was something as a street door enters a house, turning inwards for a moment, only to be turned out the next, and as a permanent thing, residing in the open air. Nor did they lose much hereby. In the cabin was no companionship. Socially, Ahab was inaccessible, though nominally included in the census of Christendom, he was still an alien to it. He lived in the world, as the last of the grizzly bears lived in settled Missouri. And as when spring and summer had departed, that wild Logan of the woods, burying himself in the hollow of a tree, lived out the winter there, sucking his own paws. So, in his inclement, howling old age, Ahab's soul, shut up in the caved trunk of his body, there fed upon the sullen paws of its gloom. Chapter 35. It was during the more pleasant weather that in due rotation with the other scene in my first masthead came out. In most American whalemen, the mastheads are manned almost simultaneously with the vessels leaving her port, even though she may have 15,000 miles and more to sail ere reaching her proper cruising ground. And if, after a 3, 4, or 5 years voyage, she is drawing home with anything empty in her, say, an empty vial even then, her mastheads are kept manned to the last, and not till her skysail poles sail in among the spires of the port does she altogether relinquish the hope of capturing one whale. Now, as the business of standing mastheads ashore or afloat is a very ancient and interesting one, let us in some measure expatiate here. I take it that the earliest standers of mastheads were the old Egyptians, because in all my researches I find none prior to them. For though their progenitors, the builders of Babel, must doubtless, by their tower, have intended to rear the loftiest masthead in all Asia, or in Africa either, yet as that great stone mast of theirs may be said to have gone by the board, in the dread gale of God's wrath. Therefore, we cannot give these Babel builders priority over the Egyptians, and that the Egyptians were a nation of masthead standers is an assertion based upon the general belief among archaeologists that the first pyramids were founded for astronomical purposes, a theory singularly supported by the peculiar stair-like formation of all 4 sides of those edifices, whereby, with prodigious long upliftings of their legs, those old astronomers were wont to mount to the apex and sing out in stars. Even as the lookouts of a modern ship sing out for a sail, are a whale just bearing in sight. In St. Stylites, the famous Christian hermit of old times, who built in the lofty stone pillar in the desert, and spent the whole latter portion of his life on its summit, hoisting his food from the ground with a tackle. In him, we have a remarkable instance of a dauntless stander of mastheads, who was not to be driven from his place by fogs or frosts, rain, hail, or sleet, but valiantly facing everything out to the last, literally died at his post. Of modern standers of mastheads we have but a lifeless set, mere stone, iron, and bronze men, who, though well capable of facing out a stiff gale, are still entirely incompetent to the business of singing out upon discovering any strange sight. God, there is Napoleon, who, upon the top of the column of Vendôme, stands with arms folded, some 150 feet in the air, careless now who rules the decks below, whether Louis Philippe, Louis Blanc, or Louis the Devil. Great Washington, too, stands high aloft on his towering mainmast in Baltimore, and like one of Hercules' pillars, his column marks that point of human grandeur beyond which few mortals will go. Admiral Nelson, also on a capstan of gunmetal, stands his masthead in Trafalgar Square, and ever, when most obscured by that London smoke, token is yet given that a hidden hero is there. For where there is smoke, must be fire. But neither great Washington, nor Napoleon, nor Nelson will answer a single hail from below. However, nobly invoked to befriend by their counsels the distracted decks upon which they gain. However, it may be surmised that their spirits penetrate through the thick haze of the future, and descry what shoals and what rocks must be shunned. It may seem unwarrantable to couple in any respect the masthead standards of the land with those of the sea, but that in truth it is not so is plainly evinced by an item for which Obed Mason, the sole historian of Nantucket, stands accountable. The worthy Obed tells us that in the early times of the whale fishery, airships were regularly launched in pursuit of the game. The people of that island erected lofty spars along the seacoast, to which the lookouts ascended by means of nailed cleats, something as foul as go upstairs in a hen house. A few years ago, the same plan was adopted by the Bay whalemen of New Zealand, who upon descrying the game, gave notice to the ready-manned boats nigh the beach. But this custom has now become obsolete. Turn we then to the one proper masthead, that of a whale ship at sea. The three mastheads are kept manned from sunrise to sunset, the seamen taking their regular turns and relieving each other every 2 hours. In the serene weather of the tropics, it is exceedingly pleasant, the masthead. Nay, to a dreamy, meditative man, it is delightful. There you stand, 100 feet above the silent decks, striding along the deep, as if the masts were gigantic stilts, while beneath you, and between your legs, as it were, swim the hugest monsters of the sea, even as ships once sailed between the boots of the famous Colossus at Old Rhodes. There you stand, lost in the infinite series of the sea, with nothing ruffled but the waves. The tranced ship indolently rolls, the drowsy trade winds blow. Everything resolves you into languor. For the most part, in this tropic whaling life, a sublime uneventfulness invests you. You hear no news, read no gazettes. Extras with startling accounts of commonplaces never delude you into unnecessary excitements. You hear of no domestic afflictions. Bankrupt securities, fall of stocks, are never troubled with the thought of what you shall have for dinner, for all your meals for 3 years, and more are snugly stowed in casks. And your bill of fare is immutable. And one of those southern whalesmen, on a long 3 or 4 years voyage, as often happens, the sum of the various hours you spend at the masthead would amount to several entire months. And it is much to be deplored that the place to which you devote so considerable a portion of the whole term of your natural life should be so sadly destitute of anything approaching to a cozy inhabitiveness, or adapted to breed a comfortable localness of feeling, such as pertains to a bed, a hammock, a hearse, a sentry box, a pulpit, a coach, or any other of those small and snug contrivances in which men temporarily isolate themselves. Your most usual point of perch is the head of the gallant mast, where you stand upon 2 thin parallel sticks, almost peculiar to whalemen, called the gallant cross trees. Here, tossed about by the sea, the beginner feels about as cozy as he would standing on a bull's horn. To be sure, in cold weather, you may carry your house aloft with you, in the shape of a watch coat. But properly speaking, the thickest watch coat is no more of a house than the unclasped. For as the soul is glued inside of its fleshy tabernacle, and cannot freely move about in it, nor even move out of it, without running great risk of perishing, like an ignorant pilgrim crossing the snowy Alps in winter, so a watch coat is not so much of a house as it is a mere envelope or additional skin encasing you. You cannot put a shelf or chest of drawers in your body, and no more can you make a convenient closet of your watch coat. Concerning all this, it is much to be deplored that the mastheads of the southern whale ship are unprovided with those enviable little tents or pulpits, called crow's nests, in which the lookouts of a Greenland whaler are protected from the inclement weather of the frozen seas. In the fireside narrative of Captain Sleep, entitled A Voyage Among the Icebergs in Quest of the Human Whale, and incidentally, for the rediscovery of the lost Icelandic colonies of old Greenland. In this admirable volume, all standers of mastheads are furnished with a charmingly circumstantial account of the then recently invented crow's nest of the glacier, which was the name of Captain Sleet's good craft. He called it the Sleet's Crow's Nest, in honor of himself, he being the original inventor and patentee, and free from all ridiculous, false delicacy, and holding that if we call our own children after our own names, so likewise should we denominate after ourselves any other apparatus we may beget. In shape, the Sleet's Crow's Nest is something like a large tierce or pipe. It is open above, however, where it is furnished with a movable side screen to keep to windward of your head in a hard gale. Being fixed on the summit of the mast, you ascend into it through a little trap hatch on the bottom. On the after side, or side next the stern of the ship, is a comfortable seat with a locker underneath for umbrellas, comforters, and coats. In front is a leather rack in which to keep your speaking trumpet, pipe, telescope, and other nautical conveniences. When Captain Sleet, in person, stood his masthead in this crow's nest of his, he tells us that he always had a rifle with him, together with a powder flask and shot, for the purpose of popping off the stray narwhales or vagrant sea unicorns infesting those waters. For you cannot successfully shoot at them from the deck, owing to the resistance of the water, but to shoot down upon them is a very different thing. Now, it was plainly a labor of love for Captain Sleet to describe, as he does, all the little detailed conveniences of his crow's nest. But though he so enlarges upon many of these, and though he treats us to a very scientific account of his experiments in this crow's nest, with a small compass he kept there for the purpose of counteracting the errors resulting from what is called the local attraction of all binnacle magnets, an error ascribable to the horizontal vicinity of the iron in the ship's planks. And in the glacier's case, perhaps to there having been so many broken down blacksmiths among her crew. I say that though the captain is very discreet and scientific here, yet for all his learned binnacle deviations, azimuth compass observations, and approximate errors, he knows very well, Captain Sleet, that he was not so much those profound magnet as to fail being attracted occasionally towards that well-replenished little case bottle. So nicely tucked in on one side of his crow's nest, within though, upon the whole, I greatly admire and even love the brave, the honest, and learned captain. Yet, I took it very ill of him that he should so utterly ignore that case bottle, seeing what a faithful friend and comforter it must have been, while, with mittened fingers and hooded head, he was studying the mathematics aloft there in that bird's nest, within, 3 or 4 perches of the pole. But if we southern whale fishers are not so snugly housed aloft as Captain Sleet and his Greenlandmen were, yet that disadvantage is greatly counterbalanced by the widely contrasting serenity of those seductive seas in which we, south fishers, mostly float. For one, I used to lounge up the rigging very leisurely, resting in the top to have a chat with Pequod, or anyone else off duty whom I might find there, then ascending a little way further, and throwing a lazy leg over the topsail yard, take a preliminary view of the watery pastures, and so at last mount to my ultimate destination. But me make a clean breast of it here, and frankly admit that I kept but sorry guard. With the problem of the universe revolving, how could I, being left completely to myself at such a thought-engendering altitude? How could I but lightly hold by obligations to observe all whale ships' standing orders? Keep your weather eye open, and sing out every time. And let me, in this place movingly admonish you, ship owners of Nantucket, beware of enlisting in your vigilant fisheries any lad with mean brow and hollow eye, given to unseasonable meditativeness, and who offers to ship with the feeding instead of boatage in his head. Beware of such an one, I say. Your whales must be seen before they can be killed. This sunken-eyed young Platonist will tell you 10 wakes round the world, and never make you 1 pint of sperm, the richer. Nor are these munitions at all unneeded. For nowadays, the whale fishery furnishes an asylum for many romantic, melancholy, and absent-minded young men disgusted with the carking cares of earth, and seeking sentiment in tar and blubber. Childe Harold not unfrequently perches himself upon the masthead of some luckless, disappointed whale ship, and in moody phrase ejaculates, "Roll on, thou deep and dark blue ocean. Roll, 10,000 blubber hunters sweep over thee in vain. Very often do the captains of such ships take those absent-minded young philosophers to task, upbraiding them with not feeling sufficient interest in the voyage, half hinting that they are so hopelessly lost to all honorable ambition as that in their secret souls they would rather not see whales than otherwise. But all in vain. Those young Platonists have a notion that their vision is imperfect. They are short-sighted. What use then to strain the visual nerve? They have left their opera glasses at home. "Why, thou monkey," said a harpooner to one of these lads, "we've been cruising now hard upon 3 years, and thou hast not raised a whale yet. Whales are scarce as hen's teeth whenever thou art up here." Perhaps they were, or perhaps there might have been shoals of them in the far horizon, but lulled into such an opium-like listlessness of vacant, unconscious reverie is this absent-minded youth by the blending cadence of waves with thoughts, that at last he loses his identity, takes the mystic ocean at his feet for the visible image of that deep, blue, bottomless soul pervading mankind and nature, and every strange, half-seen, gliding, beautiful thing that eludes him. Every dimly discovered, uprising fin of some undiscernible form seems to him the embodiment of those elusive thoughts that only people the soul by continually flitting through it. In this enchanted mood, thy spirit ebbs away to whence it came, becomes diffused through time and space, like Cranmer's sprinkled pantheistic ashes, forming at last a part of every shore the round globe over. There is no life in me now, except that rocking life imparted by a gently rolling ship, by her borrowed from the sea, by the sea from the inscrutable tides of God. But while this sleep, this stream is on, yea, move your foot or hand an inch, slip your hold at all, and your identity comes back in horror. Over Discartian vortices you hover, and perhaps at midday, in the fairest weather, with one half-throttled shriek, you drop through that transparent air into the summer sea, no more, to rise forever. Heed it well, ye pantheist. Chapter 36. It was not a great while after the affair of the pipe But one morning shortly after breakfast, Ahab, as was his wont, ascended the cabin gangway to the deck. Their most sea captains usually walk at that hour, as country gentlemen, after the same meal, take a few turns in the garden. Soon his steady, ivory stride was heard, as to and fro he paced his old rounds, upon planks so familiar to his tread. But they were all over-dented, like geological stones, with the peculiar mark on his walk. Did you fixably gaze, too, upon that ribbed and dented brow? There also you would see still stranger footprints, the footprints of his one unsleeping, ever-pacing foe. But on the occasion in question, those dents looked deeper, even as his nervous step that morning left a deeper mark. So full of his thought was Ahab, that at every uniform turn that he made, now at the mainmast and now at the binnacle, you could almost see that thought turn in him as he turned, and pace in him as he paced. So completely possessing him indeed, that it all but seemed the inward mold of every outer movement. Do you mark him, Flask? What? Whispered Stubb. The chick that's in him pecks the shell. It will soon be out. The hours wore on. Ahab now shut up within his cabin. Anon pacing the deck with the same intense bigotry of purpose in his aspect. It drew near the close of day. Suddenly, he came to a halt by the bulwarks, and inserting his bone leg into the auger hole there, and with one hand grasping a shroud, he ordered Starbuck to send everybody aft. "Sir," said the mate, astonished at an order seldom or never given on shipboard, except in some extraordinary case. "Send everybody aft," repeated Ahab. "Mastheads, there. Come down." When the entire ship's company were assembled, and with curious and not wholly unapprehensive faces were eyeing him, for he looked not unlike the weather horizon when a storm is coming up, Ahab, after rapidly glancing over the bulwarks and then darting his eyes among the crew, started from his standpoint, and as though not a soul were nigh him, resumed his heavy turns upon the deck. With bent head and half-slouched hat, he continued to pace, unmindful of the wondering whispering among the men, till Stubb cautiously whispered to Flask that Ahab must have summoned them there for the purpose of witnessing a pedestrian feat. But this did not last long. Vehemently pausing, he cried, "What do you do when you see a whale, Ned?" "Sing out for him," was the impulsive rejoinder from a score of club voices. "Good. Let," cried Ahab, with a wild approval in his tones, observing the hearty animation into which his unexpected question have so magnetically thrown them. "And what do you next, men?" "Lower away, and after him." "And what tune is it you pull to, men? A dead whale or a stove boat?" More and more, strangely and fiercely glad and approving, grew the countenance of the old man at every shout, while the mariners began to gaze curiously at each other, as if marveling how it was that they themselves became so excited at such seemingly purposeless question. But they were all eagerness again, as Ahab, now half revolving in his pivot hole, with one hand reaching high up a shroud and tightly, almost convulsively grasping it, addressed them thus: "All ye mastheaders have before now heard me give orders about a white whale. Look ye, do you see this Spanish ounce of gold?" Holding up a broad, bright coin to the sun. "It is a $16 piece, then. Do you see it? Mr. Starbuck, hand me on top maul." While the mate was getting the hammer, Ahab, without speaking, was slowly rubbing the gold piece against the skirts of his jacket, as if to heighten its luster. and without using any words was meanwhile lowly humming to himself, producing a sound so strangely muffled and inarticulate that it seemed the mechanical humming of the wheels of his vitality in him. Receiving the top maul from Starbuck, he advanced towards the mainmast with the hammer uplifted in one hand, exhibiting the gold with the other, and with that high raised voice exclaiming, "Whosoever of ye raises me a white-headed whale with a wrinkled brow and a crooked jaw, whosoever of ye raises me that white-headed whale with 3 holes punctured in his starboard fluke, look ye, whosoever of ye raises me that same white whale, he shall have this gold ounce, my boys." "Huzzah! Huzzah!" cried the seamen, as with swinging tarpaulins they hailed the act of nailing the gold to the mast.
"It's a white whale, I say," resumed Ahab, as he threw down the topmow a white whale.
"Skin your eyes for him, men. Look sharp for white water. If ye see but a bubble, sing out." All this while Tashtego, Dagu, and Queequeg had looked on with intense interest and surprise than the rest, and at the mention of the wrinkled brow and crooked jaw, they had started as if each was separately touched by some specific recollection. Captain Ahab said Tashtego that white whale must be the same that some call Moby Dick. "Moby Dick," shouted Ahab. "Do you know the white whale then, Tash? Does he fantail a little curious, sir, before he goes down?" Said the gay-header deliberately. "And has he a curious spout too?" said Dedu. "Very bushy, even for a parmacetti, and mighty quick, Captain Ahab."
"And he have 1, 2, 3.
"Oh, good many iron in him hide too, Captain," cried Queequeg disjointedly. "All twisk-tee be twisk like him. Him faltering hard for a and screwing his hand round and round, as though uncorking a bottle, like him, corkscrew," cried Ahab. "Aye, Queequeg, the harpoons lie all twisted and wrenched in. Aye, Dagu, his spout is a big one, like a whole shock of wheat, and white as a pile of our Nantucket wool after the great annual sheep shearing. Aye, Tashtego, and he fantails like a split jib in a squall. Daffin devils, men, it is Moby Dick ye have seen. Moby Dick, Moby Dick." Captain Ahab, said Starbuck, who, with stub and flask, had thus far been eyeing his superior with increasing surprise, but at last seemed struck with a thought which somewhat explained all the wonder. "Captain Ahab, I have heard of Moby Dick, but it was not Moby Dick that took off thy leg." "Who told thee that?" cried Ahab. Then, pausing, "I, Starbuck. I, my hearties, all round. It was Moby Dick that dismasted me. Moby Dick that brought me to this dead stump."
I stand on now.
"Aye, aye," he shouted with a terrific, loud, animal sob like that of a heart-stricken moose. "Aye. It was that, the cursed white whale that raised me, made a poor pegging lover of me for ever and a day." Then tossing both arms, with measureless imprecations, he shouted out, "Aye, aye, and I'll chase him round Good Hope, and round the Horn, and round the Norway Maelstrom, and round Perdition's flames, before I give him up. And this is what ye have shipped for, men, to chase that white whale on both sides of land, and over all sides of earth, till he spouts black blood, and rolls fin out. What say ye, men? Will ye splice hands on it? Now, I think ye do work brave." "Aye, aye," shouted the harpooneers and seamen, running closer to the excited old man. A sharp eye for the white whale. A sharp lance for Moby Dick. God bless ye. He see to half sob and half shout. God bless you, men. Steward, go draw the great measure of grog. But what's this long face about, Mr. Starbuck? Wilt thou not chase the white whale? Art not game for Moby Dick? I am game for his crooked jaw, and for the jaws of death too, Captain Ahab, if it fairly comes in the way of the business we follow. But I came here to hunt whales, not my commander's vengeance. But how many barrels will thy vengeance yield thee, even if thou gettest it, Captain Ahab? It will not fetch thee much in our Nantucket market. Nantucket market. But come closer, Starbuck. I'll requirest a little lower layer. If money's to be the measurer, man, and the accountants had computed their great counting house the globe by girdling it with guineas, 1 to every 3 parts of an inch, then let me tell thee that my vengeance will fetch a great premium here. He smites his chest, whispered, Stud. But stab for? Methinks it rings most vast, but hollow. Vengeance on a dumb brute, cried Starbuck, that simply smote thee from blindest instinct. Madness. To the enraged with a dumb thing, Captain Ahab, seems blasphemous. Hark ye, yet again, the little lower layer. All visible objects, man, are but as pasteboard masks. But, in each event, in the living act, the undoubted deed there, some unknown, but still reasoning thing puts forth the moldings of its features from behind the unreasoning mask. If man will strike through the mask, how can the prisoner reach outside, except by thrusting through the wall? To me, the white whale is that wall, shoved near to me. Sometimes, I think there's naught beyond, but 'tis enough. He tasks me. He heaps me. I see in him outrageous strength, with an inscrutable malice signaling it. That inscrutable thing is chiefly what I hate. And be the white whale agent, or be the white whale principal, I will wreak that hate upon him. Talk not to me of blasphemy, man. I'd strike the sun if it insulted me. For, could the sun do that, then could I do the other. Since there is ever a sort of fair play herein, jealousy presiding over all creation. But not my master, man, is even that fair play. Who's over me? Truth hath no confines. Take off thine eye. More intolerable than fiends glaring is a doltish stare. So, thou reddenest and palest. My heat has melted thee to anger glow. But look,
Yea, Starbuck, what is said in heat, that thing unsays itself.
there are men from whom warm words are small in dignity. I meant not to incense thee. Let it go. Look, see yonder Turkish chiefs of spotted tarn, living, breathing pictures painted by the sun. The pagan leopards, the unrecking and unworshipping things that live, and seek and give no reasons for the torrid life they feel. Because a crew, men, the crew, are they not one and all with Ahab in this matter of the whale? See, Stud, he laughs. See yonder Chilean, he snorts to think of it. Stand up amid the general hurricane, thy one-tossed sapling cannot, Starbuck. And what is it? Reckon it. This but to help strike a thin. No wondrous feat for Starbuck. What is it more? From this one poor hunt, than the best lance out of all Nantucket. Surely he will not hang back, when every foremast hand has clutched a whetstone. Now, I can't. Constraining sees thee. I see. But billow lifts thee. Speak, but speak. Aye, aye. Thy silence then, that voices thee. Something shot from my dilated nostrils. He has inhaled it in his lungs. Starbuck now is mine. Cannot oppose me now without rebellion. God keep me, keep us all, murmured Starbuck, lowly. But in his joy at the enchanted, tacit acquiescence of the mate, Ahab did not hear his foreboding invocation, nor yet the low laugh from the hold, nor yet the presaging vibrations of the winds in the cordage, nor yet the hollow flap of the sails against the mast, as for a moment their hearts sank in. For again Starbuck's downcast eyes lighted up with the stubbornness of life. The subterranean laugh died away. The winds blew on. The sails filled out. The ship heaved and rolled as before. Ah, ye admonitions and warnings, why stay ye not when ye come? But rather are ye predictions than warnings, you shadows. Yet not so much predictions from without, as verifications of the foregoing things within. And for with little external to constrain us, the innermost necessities in our being, these still drive us on. The measure, cried Ahab, receiving the brimming pewter, and turning to the harpooneers, he ordered them to produce their weapons. Then, ranging them before him near the capstan, with their harpoons in their hands, while his 3 mates stood at his side with their lances, and the rest of the ship's company formed a circle round the group. He stood for an instant, searchingly eyeing every man of his crew. But those wild eyes met his, as the bloodshot eyes of the prairie wolves meet the eye of their leader, ere he rushes on at their head in the trail of the bison. But only to fall into the hidden snare of the Indian. Drink and pass, he cried, handing the heavy-charged flagon to the nearest seaman. The crew alone, now drink. Round with it, round. Short draughts, long swallows, none. This hot as Satan's hoof. So, it goes round excellently. It spiralizes, and forks out at the serpent's snapping eye. Well done. Almost drained. That way it went, this way it comes. Hand at me, here's a hollow. Men, ye seen the years. So brimming life is gulped and gone. Steward, refill. Attend now, my braves. I have mustered ye all round this taxton, and ye mates, flank me with your lances, and ye harpooneers, stand there with your irons, and ye, stout mariners, bring me in, that I may, in some sort, revive a noble custom of my fishermen fathers before me. O men, you will yet see that. Boy, come back. Bad pennies, come not sooner. Hand at me. Why now? This pewter had run brimming again. We are not thou St. Vitus's employee, thou Aggie. Advance, ye mates. Cross your lances full before me. Well done. Let me touch the axis. So saying, with extended arm, he grasped the 3 level, radiating lances at their crossed center. While so doing, suddenly and nervously twitched them. Meanwhile, glancing intently from Starbuck to Stub, from Stub to Flask, it seemed as though, by some nameless interior volition, he would fain have shocked into them the same fiery emotion accumulated within the laden jar of his own magnetic life. The 3 mates quailed before his strong, sustained, and mystic aspect. Stud and Flask looked sideways from him. The honest eye of Starbuck fell downright. In vain cried Ahab. But maybe this is well. For did ye three but once take the full force shock, then mine own electric thing? That had perhaps expired from out me. Perchance, too, it would have dropped, ye dead. Not. Down lances. And now, ye mates, I do appoint ye 3 cupbearers to my 3 pagan kinsmen. There, yon 3 most honorable gentlemen and noblemen. Disdain the task? What, when the great Pope washes the feet of beggars in his tiara or ewer? Oh, my sweet cardinals, your own condescension that shall bend ye to it. I do not order ye will it. Cut your seizing and draw the pulls. Ye harpooneers, silently obeying the order, the 3 harpooneers now stood with the detached iron part of their harpoon, some 3 feet long, held barbs up before him. Stab me not with that keen steel. Camp them over. Know ye not the goblet end? Turn up the socket. So, now, ye, cupbearers, advance. The irons, take them, and then hold them while I fill. Forthwith, slowly going from one officer to the other, he brimmed the harpoon sockets with the fiery waters from the pewter. Now, 3 to 3, ye stand. Commend the murderous chalices. Bestill them, ye who are now made parties to this indissoluble league. Ha! Starbuck. But the deed is done. Yon ratifying sun now waits to sit upon it. Drink, ye harpooneers, drink and swear, ye men, that man, the deathful whaleboat's bow. Dust to Moby Dick. God hunt us all, if we do not hunt Moby Dick to his death. The long, barbed steel goblets were lifted, and to cries and maledictions against the white whale, the spirits were simultaneously quaffed down with a sock. Starbuck paled and turned and shivered. Once more, and finally, the replenished pewter went the rounds among the frantic crew, when, waving his free hand to them, they all dispersed, and Ahab retired within his cabin. Chapter 37. The cabin by the stern windows. Ahab, sitting alone and gazing out, I leave a white and turbid wake, pale waters, paler cheeks, where, ere I sail, that's what we have. We have the envious billows sidelong swell to whelm my track. Let them. But first I pass. Yonder, by ever-brimming goblets rim, the warm waves blush like wine. The gold brow plumbs the blue. The diver sun, slow dive from noon, goes down. My soul mounts up. She wearies with her endless hill. Is then the crown too heavy that I wear? This iron crown of Lombardy. Yet is it bright with many a gem? I see not its far flashings, but darkly feel that I wear but the dazzlingly confound. This iron that I know, not gold, this split too that I feel. The jagged edge galls me so. My brain seems to beat against the solid metal. Aye, steel skull, mine. A sort that needs no helmet in the most brain-battering fight. Dry heat upon my brow. Oh, time was, when as the sunrise nobly spurred me, so the sunset soothed. No more. This lovely light, it lights not me. All loveliness is anguish to me, since I can ne'er enjoy. Gifted with the high perception, I lack the low, enjoying power. Damned, most subtly and most malignantly, damned in the midst of paradise. Good night. Good night. Waving his hand, he moves from the window. That was not so hard a task. I thought to find one stubborn at the least. But my one cobbed circle fits into all their various wheels, and they revolve. Or if you will, like so many ant hills of powder, they all stand before me. And I that match, oh, hard, that to fire others, the match itself must needs be wasting. Where I've dared, I've willed, and what I've willed, I'll do. They think me mad. Starbuck does. But I'm demoniac. Madness, maddened. That wild madness that's only calm to comprehend itself. The prophecy was that I should be dismembered. And I lost this leg. I now prophesy that I will dismember my dismember. Now then be the prophet and the fulfiller one. That's more than ye, great gods, ever were. I laugh and hoot it ye cricket players, ye pugilists, ye deaf Burks, and blinded bendidos. I will not say as schoolboys do to boys. Take someone of your own size. Point. Don't pummel me. No, you've knocked me down, and I am up again. But yet have run and hidden. Come forth from behind your cotton backs. I have no long gun to reach you. Come, Ahab's compliments to you. Come and see if he can swerve me. Swerve me? Ye cannot swerve me, else ye swerve yourselves. Man has ye there. Swerve me? The path to my fixed purpose is laid with iron rails, whereon my soul is grooved to run. Over unsounded gorges, through the rifled hearts of mountains, under torrents' beds, unerringly I rush. With nought's an obstacle, nought's an angle to the iron way. Chapter 38, by the mainmast. Starbuck leaning against it. My soul is more than matched. She's overmanned. Am I an madman? Insufferable sting that sanity should ground arms on such a field. But he drilled deep down and blasted all my reason out of me. I think I see his impious end, but feel that I must help him to it. Real I, no I, the ineffable thing has tied me to him, tows me with a cable I have no knife to cut. Horrible old man, who's over him, he cries. Aye, he would be a Democrat to all above. Look, have you lords it over, all below. Oh, I plainly see my miserable office to obey, rebelling, and worse yet, to hate, with touch of pity. For in his eyes I read some lurid woe would shrivel me up, had I it. Yet is there hope. Time and tide flow wide. The hated whale has the round watery world to swim in, as the small goldfish has its glassy globe. His heaven insulting purpose, God may wedge aside. I would upheart were it not like lead. But my whole clocks run down, my heart the all-controlling weight. I have no key to lift again. A burst of revelry from the forecastle. Oh, God, to sail with such a heaving crew that have small touch of human mothers in them. Whelped somewhere by the sharkish sea, the white whale is their demigorgon. Honk! The infernal orgies, that revelry is forward. Mark the unfaltering silence aft. Methinks it pictures life, foremost through the sparkling sea shoots on the gay, embattled, bantering bow, but only to drag dark Ahab after it, where he broods within his sternward cabin, builded over the dead water of the wake, and further on,
hunted by its wolfish gurglings. Mulan howl thrills me through. Peace. Ye revelers, set the watch. Oh, life. This is in an hour like this, with soul beat down and held to knowledge, as wild, untutored things are forced to feed. Oh, life. This is now that I do feel the latent horror, but this is not me. That horror's out of me, and with the soft feeling of the human in me. Yet will I try to fight grim phantom future? Stand by me, hold me, bind me, O ye blessed infant. Chapter 39. Foretop. Stub, solace, and mending a brace. Ha! Ha! That, huh. Hem. Clear my throat? I've been thinking over it ever since, and that ha-ha's the final consequence. Why so? Because a laugh's the wisest, easiest answer to all that's queer. And come what will, one comfort's always left. That unfailing comfort is, it's all predestined. I heard not all his talk with Starbuck, but to my poor eye, Starbuck then looked something, as I the other evening felt. Be sure the old mogul has fixed him too. I twigged it, knew it, had had the gift, might readily have prophesied it, for when I clapped my eye upon his skull, I saw it. Well, Stub, underscore, why Stub? That's my title. Well, Stub, what of it, Stub? Here's a carcass. I know not all that may be coming, but be it what it will, I'll go to it laughing. Such a waggish leering as lurks in all your horribles. I feel funny. Lyra. Skira. What's my juicy little pair at home doing now? Crying its eyes out. Giving a party to the last arrived harpooneers, I dare say, gay as a frigate's pennant. And so am I. Fala. Lyra. Skira. Oh. We'll drink tonight with hearts as light, to love as gay and fleeting, as bubbles that swim on the beaker's brim and break on the web's wall meeting. A brace stave that. Who calls? Mr. Starbuck. I, sir. He's my superior. He has his too. If I'm not mistaken. Aye, sir. Just through with this job. Coming. Chapter 40. Cyclosis. Cyclosis. Like sunstroke cyclosis. Or a telling multern. Consider complicate. For sail rises and discovers the watch standing, lounging, leaning, and lying in various attitudes, all singing in chorus. Farewell and adieu to you, Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu to you, ladies of Spain. Our captains commanded. Oh, boys, don't be sentimental. It's bad for the digestion. Take a tonic. Follow me. Our captain stood upon the deck, a spyglass in his hand, a viewing of those gallant whales. That blew at every strand. Haul your tubs in your boats, my boys, and by your braces stand, and we'll have one of those fine whales. Hand, boys, over hand. So, be cheery, my lads. May your hearts never fail, while the bold harpooner is striking the whale. Mate's voice from the quarterdeck. 8 bells there, forward. Avast the chorus. 8 bells there. Do ye hear, bellboy? Strike the bell 8, thou pit, thou blackling, and let me call the watch. I've got the sort of mouth for that, the hogshead mouth. So, thrusts his head down. The scuttle, star, do,
N-S-A-H-O-Y.
8 bells there below. Tumble up, Dutch, sailor. Gren snoozing tonight, Matty. Fat night for that. I marked this in our old mogul's wine. It's quite as deadening to some, as filliping to others. We sing. They sleep. I lie down there, like ground tier butts. At them again. There, take this copper pump, and hail them through it. Tell them to a vast dreaming of their lasses. Tell them it's the resurrection. They must kiss their last and come to judgment. That's the way. That's it. By throat art spoiled with eating Amsterdam butter. Revenue. Hissed boys. Let's have a jig or two before we ride to anchor in Blanket Bay. What say me? There comes the other watch. Stand by all legs. Pip. Little Pip. Hurrah. With your tambourine. Pip. Don't know where it is. French sailor. Beat thy belly then, and rag thy ears. Jig it, men, I say. Mary's the word. Hurrah. Damn me. Won't you dance? Form, now, Indian file, and gallop into the double shuffle. Throw yourselves. Legs, if that is Iceland sailor. I don't like your floor, Matty. It's too springy to my taste. I'm used to ice floors. I'm sorry to throw cold water on the subject, but excuse me. Maltese sailor. Me too. Where was your girls? Who but a fool would take his left hand by his right and say to himself, how do ye do? Partners. I must have partners. To see. Hi. Girls in a green. Then I'll hop with ya. Yeah, turn grasshopper. Long Island sailor. Well, you sulkies. There's plenty more of us. Pocorn. When you may say I. All legs go to harvest soon. Ah, here comes the music. Now, for it. Azore. Ascending and pitching the tambourine up the scuttle. Here you are. And there's the windlass bits. Up you mount. Now, boys. The half of them dance to the tambourine. Some go below. Some sleep or lie among the coils of rigging. Oaths aplenty. Azori, sailor. Go it, Pip. Bang it, bell boy. Rig it, dig it, stig it, quig it, bell boy. Make fireflies. Break the jinglers. Pip. Jinglers? You say? There goes another, dropped off. I pound it. China's sailor. Rattle by teeth then.
And pound away.
Make a pagoda of thyself. French sailor. What? Merry mad. Hold up thy hoop, Pip, till I jump through it. Split gyps. Tear yourselves. Dodge thegol. That's a white man. He calls that fun. Off. Save my sweat. This old Manx sailor. I wonder whether those jolly lads beffing them what they are dancing. I will dance over your grave. I will. That's the bitterest threat of your night women, that beat headwinds round corners. Oh, Christ. To think of the green maybes and the green-skulled crews. Well, belike the whole world's a ball, as you scholars have it. And so this is right to make one ballroom of it. Dance on, lads. You're young. I was once. Spow. Oh, this is worse than pulling after whales in a calm. Give us a whiff, Tash. They cease dancing and gather in clusters. Meantime, the sky darkens, the wind rises. Lascar sailor by Barma. Boys, it'll be, thou sail soon. The sky-born, high-tide Ganges turn to wind. Thou showest thy black brow, Siva, multi-sailor, reclining and shaking his cap. It's the waves. The snow's caps turn to jigget now. They'll shake their tassels soon. Now would all the waves were winning, then I'd go drown, and chasse with them evermore. There's not so sweet on earth. Heaven may not match it, as those swift glances of warm, wild bosoms in the dance, when the over-arboring arms hide such ripe, bursting grapes. Sicilian sailor, tell me not of it. Hark ye, lab fleet interlacings of the limbs like swayings, cloyings, flutterings. Limp, heart, hip, all grace. Unceasing touch and go, not taste, observe ye, else comes satiety. Ye pagan, to hit and sailor, reclining on a mat, hail, holy nakedness of our dancing girls, the Hiva Hiva. Ah, low-veiled, high-palmed Tahiti. I still rest me on thy mat, but the soft soil has slid. I saw thee woven in the wood, my mat green, the first day I brought ye thence, now worn and wilted quite. Ah me, not thou nor I can bear the change. How then, if so be transplanted to yon sky? Here I want the roaring streams from Pyrrhodites' peak of spears, when they leap down the crags and drown the villages. The blast, up, spine, and meet it. Creeps to his feet, but would be these copper. This is the final problem. How the sea rolls, swash him against the side. Stand by for reefing, hearties. The winds are just crossing swords. Pell-mell, they'll go lunging presently. Now, crack, crack, old ship. So long as thou crackest, thou holdest. Well done. The mate there, hold ye to it stiffly. He's no more afraid than the Isle Fort at Kattegat, but there to fight the Baltic with storm-lashed guns, on which the sea salt cakes. He has his orders. Mind ye that. I heard old Ahab tell him he must always kill a squall, something as they burst a water spout with a pistol. Fire your ship right into it. English sailor, blood. But that old man's a grand old cove. We are the lads to hunt him up his whale. Oh, I. From this toward end to this lover, we would continue. We would continue to send up the community apologies. How the three pines shake. Pines are the hardest sort of tree to live when shifted to any other soil. And here there's none, but the crew's cursed clay. Steady, helmsman, steady. This is the sort of weather when brave hearts snap ashore and keeled hulls split at sea. Our captain has his birthmark. Look yonder, boys. There's another in the sky. Lurid like, you see all else pitch black. Dado. What of that? Who's afraid of black's afraid of me. I'm quarried out of it. God, he wants to bully. Oh, the old grudge makes me touchy. I, harpooner, thy race is the undeniable dark side of mankind. Devilish dark at that. No offense. Daggerel. None. St. Jago sailor. That Spaniard's mad or drunk. But that can't be. Or else in his one case, our old Moguls, fire waters, are somewhat long and work. What's that I saw? Lightning. Yes. Spanish sailor. What? No. Dagu, showing his teeth.
Dagu. Swallowdine. Mannequin. White skin, white liver, white jung, Spanish sailor. Knife thee heartily. Big frame, small spirit. All. Arrow, arrow. Arrow, Tashtagaro. Arrow allow, and arrow aloft. Gods and men, both brawlers. Belthus sailor. Arrow. Allah a row. The Virgin be blessed, a row. Plunge in with ye. An English sailor. Fair play. Snatch the Spaniard's knife. A ring. Old make sailor. Ready, forernt. There, the ringed horizon. In that ring, Cain struck Abel. Sweet work, right work. Now, why then, God, madest thou the ring? Mate's voice from the quarterdeck. Hands by the halyards and topgallant sails. Stand by to reef topsails. All the squall. The squall. Jump, my jollies. They scatter. Pip, shrinking under the windlass. First, jollies? Lord help such jollies. Crish, crash, grish. There goes the gypstay. Blang lang. God. Duck lower, Pip. Here comes the royal yard. It's worse than being in the world woods, the last day of the year, who go climbing after chestnuts now. But there they go. All cursing. And here I bolt. Fine prospects to them. They're on the road to heaven. Hold on hard. Jiminy. What a squall. But those chaps there are worse yet. They're your white squalls. They. White squalls. White whale. Sure. Sure. Here have I heard all their chat just now. And the light whale. Sure. But spoken of once, and only this evening. It makes me jingle all over like my tambourine. That anaconda of an old man swore him in to hunt him. Oh, thou big white god aloft there somewhere in yon darkness, have mercy on this small black boy down here. Just preserve him from all men that have no bowels to feel fear.